Welcome to HP FanFiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. Severus Snape was sitting silently in front of the fire in his living room. He was watching, and yet not watching, the flames. His mind was preoccupied with things he had been thinking about ever since the revelation in the hospital wing a few days ago. Potter. Salvazar. So different, and yet the same. And Severus, for all his hatred of his rival James Potter, wasn't sure if he could think about the boy. No, man, his rival's son had become the same. The boy, Lily's boy, was so different, in a way different that Severus had tried to never see compared to his father. And yet, at the same time, he was so similar and still so different compared to Lily as well. Lily's boy. Lily's child, all grown up, and Severus's head of house. Maybe, Severus mused for the first time in his life, it shouldn't have been with Lily. Not when Lily and he were related. It was a heart-breaking thought, and a healing thought as well. Lily and he were related. They had always had a connection they hadn't known about, and yet still had existed. It was soothing. Heart-wrenching and grief-introducing, but so soothing as well. Because, as much as Severus hated Potter Sr. being related to Lily, even if it was just by her being the mother of his head of house, meant that Potter Sr. hadn't actually been able to take her from Severus in the end. Lily, gone and lost in time, was still part of Severus's life as the mother of the man who had decided to take Severus in without conditions, without prejudice. What a soothing thought. Severus closed his eyes, then sighed and looked down to the book in his lap. The book contained his tries to keep Sal Potter alive. Sadly enough, until now, tries was the only thing it contained. Not one of the ideas Severus had had were actually able to cure Potter right now. And there's no lid in how to save him, Severus thought bitterly. No lid on how to return him to health. And that was the crux of the matter. Severus and Poppy had checked up on Potter's health every time the boy had gone to the hospital wing to check up on the Hufflepuff, and to their concern, Potter's health was deteriorating further and further, not in a way that would kill him within weeks, but badly enough that he would be dead in a few months the latest. Of course, Severus couldn't accept that. There was personal pride, professional pride, and the fact that the boy, as much as Severus had once hated him, was still family. Yet, Severus thought darkly, even as the youngest potions master in the last 2 centuries, I can't find a way to cure him. Unlike Potter, who had been able to heal the Hufflepuff girl without a second thought, that last thought brought Severus to another matter entirely. Umbridge? Severus thought darkly. There was something going down with Umbridge. If not yet, it would be soon. Oh, all in all, there hadn't been a lot of signs about that since the girl's accident. But somehow the atmosphere in the whole castle had changed. It nearly felt as if the castle itself had turned against Umbridge. And maybe it has, Severus thought darkly, thinking about Potter. Maybe it has. And maybe Severus actually didn't want to know what would happen to Umbridge when the storm would finally break loose. After all, knowing that it wouldn't be good at all should be enough even for someone as curious as Severus Snape. The Dark Lord would have actually ended up being impressed if it wasn't his arch-enemy who's planning the whole thing, Severus thought to himself. At least that's what he guessed according to the feeling he got from the castle. Whatever would happen, Severus was sure that one Umbridge wouldn't come out on top in the end. There's only the question how much Potter, Sal, is planning to use her mismanagement for his own gains before he destroys her, at least politically, entirely. Severus added mentally, because Potter was a Slytherin, and he would always try to use circumstances like that to his full abilities. And if Severus had a say in it, it would be Potter who earned the fruits of his labor and not Severus as his heir, even if that meant for Severus to search night and day for a cure to Potter's ailment. With that thought, Severus turned back to his notebook. Maybe he could stop Potter's death if he... Grimmauld Place at the same time was nearly empty. The order was gone. They all had things to do, day jobs, family, missions, other places to live at. Even Remus Lupin, who had no job and no good place to live, had found another place to be for that day. The only one who hadn't had hidden himself away in one of the bigger rooms in the manor and was about to systematically destroy it, not because he actually tried to destroy it, something that might have been a possibility considering how much he had loved the previous owner of that house, but because the destruction was simply a welcome side effect for the things he was doing. Sirius Black was concentrating. His eyes were closed, his wand in his hand, and his clothing was old and worn in case it would be singed if something went wrong, which it had before, like the room was showing. In the middle of the room, black sparks were dancing. Sirius took a deep breath. It had been 1.5 weeks since he had gone to Gringotts, and even now he was still nervous and a bit unsure about his new role as the Lord of House Black. If Sirius was truthful, then he would say that he had never expected, never wanted to take up the lordship of House Black. In his youth, he had heard about the House Black and all its glory from his mother, who preached pure-blooded belief, and her happiness about the fact that she had been the one to blast Sirius's squib relative Marius from the family tree. Sirius had hated her proud words about the abandonment of an innocent man, never knowing that said man had never been banned from the Black family officially and lived and fought with them instead until the day he died. In Sirius's eyes, his family had been dark and corrupted like his mother had been. His father, on the other hand, never made a true and lasting impression on Sirius. The man had never gone against his wife, never said anything to give Sirius a better impression of his family. Instead, his father had been a weak-willed wizard, not worthy to follow in Sirius' eyes. Sirius couldn't believe that all those years he had been looking for someone worthy in his own family. He just would have had to take a closer look to the two men he ignored as a child, his mind already made up about his grandfathers long before Sirius actually thought for himself. His grandfathers, two men who had kept their distance to Sirius' parents, both preoccupied with the war and politics and their failing health, and therefore unable to actually take a closer look at their two grandchildren who should have been raised by the true Black ideals that they themselves had taught their children. And Sirius, for all his hatred and distance from the family, had forgiven his grandparents for their absence. And wasn't that an odd thought, considering that he had been against his family, including his grandparents, for the better part of his life? Still, Sirius was a free man now, a free man and the Lord Black. A Lord Black who understood for the first time what it meant to be the Lord of House Black. So now, 1.5 weeks later, just a day before Hogwarts would let out for Christmas, Sirius was finally willing to step up to his legacy. A legacy he had ignored since he had broken with his family shortly before his 16th birthday. Again, Sirius took a deep breath. Then he raised his wand, and for the first time in nearly 20 years, his wand performed a spell he had labeled dark as a teenager. A black small flame danced out of his wand, joining other black flames in the air. Each flame was a small rune, hidden in its black burning core. Again, Sirius took a deep breath, centering himself, and again he repeated the process. But this time around, unlike the last times, the moment his black and tiny flame joined the others, the whole structure made of black flames flashed a golden black flash for a second. Then, the ward Sirius had built beforehand crumbled under the assault of the wardbreaker Sirius had established. Again Sirius took a slow, deep and centering breath. Sweat poured down his forehead and soaked his clothing. And yet he had done it. For the first time he had followed his ancestors, breaking a ward he had created just beforehand. "I need someone to help me. If I ever go up against wards I don't know," Sirius uttered to himself, watching the place where his ward had once been. "I need a ward holder, someone to help me center." That thought, oddly enough, turned to something Sirius had never considered before now, a thought so odd that he stopped in his tracks for a second after thinking it just to feel stunned about himself. "I wish Regulus would be still alive," he had thought. "I'd needed him for this." How odd a thought, considering what he normally thought about his little brother, and yet, so utterly and desperately true. I wish Regulus was still alive and at my side. A sad thought, and yet one that led Sirius think about the letter of the Longbottoms, his alliance with the House Longbottom, an alliance established by his heir and yet not by Harry. Regulus? Lord Black, The Dowager Longbottom had greeted him the day he met to discuss an alliance. He had no idea how it had been established. "I see you got my letter." "I did, Dowager," Sirius replied. "Yet, I cannot understand how we can have an alliance if the only heir I know about is Harry, who is far too young to leave Hogwarts to establish an alliance with your house." "It wasn't Potter," replied the Dowager immediately, "but the alliance proposed to us was real enough." Sirius was sure that the Dowager was keeping something from him. Yet, considering that the House Longbottom had nothing to do with Sirius's own house's troubles, she had no obligation to actually tell Sirius who had been the one to establish the alliance. The fact that an alliance had been established was already clear without finding out the source. Sirius had felt the connection built by the alliance the moment he had met the Dowager for the first time. "I am quite aware about that fact, Dowager," Sirius agreed. The Dowager inclined her head at that, obviously soothed by Sirius' ready acceptance of the situation. "Well, Lord Black," she said slowly, "you are here. Will we break this alliance before it's truly established, or will you accept like I accepted it?" Sirius hesitated for a second. In his mind he saw the letter of the House of Longbottom again. "To the Venerable Lord Black," it read. "The House Longbottom hereby writes to you to formalize the alliance your heir proposed to us just a few weeks ago. House Longbottom wishes to reaffirm and officiate this alliance before the first Wizengamot meeting of the new year in January. At this time, House Longbottom will return into the Wizengamot under a new lord and wishes to ensure old alliances and officiate those that have been proposed to ensure the new lord's success. Sincerely, the House of Longbottom." Was he willing to alliance himself with the House of Longbottom? The house was light, the house was on the right side and not allied with Dumbledore. Was Sirius willing to come into its fold, alliance himself with it and its allies? "What are your conditions to establish this alliance?" Sirius finally asked. The Longbottom Dowager looked at him piercingly. "Bellatrix Lestrange," she said coolly. Sirius immediately understood. "She has already lost her place in the Black family," he replied, looking into her eyes, squarely. "It will be officially within the next 3 weeks. That long it would take to ensure that the paperwork of Bellatrix's exclusion and the break of the alliance between Lestrange and Black would be through all the channels." "Good," the Dowager replied. "Then there's no other demand from the House Longbottom to the House Black to establish this alliance?" Sirius inclined his head. The House Black has no objections to an alliance with House Longbottom as well, he finally decided. Augusta Longbottom smirked at that, clearly quite happy with Sirius's answer. "So hear my oath, Lord Black," she said, before continuing with her oath of alliance. "House Longbottom offers alliance to House Black, to follow where they go, to protect if they need protection, to support if they need support, to fight side by side until our houses cease to exist, or this alliance fails. So I, Augusta Elizabeth Longbottom, Regent of Longbottom, swear." A green mist rose from the Longbottom Dowager's body to show the flowing crest of Longbottom over her head. Sirius couldn't help but stare at the mist surrounding the Dowager's body. He had never seen an alliance oath in effect. For a second he was silent, then he took a deep breath and spoke the words he had never thought he would ever speak in his life. "House Black offers alliance to House Longbottom, to follow where they go, to protect if they need protection, to support if they need support, to fight side by side until our houses cease to exist or this alliance fails. So I, Sirius Orion Black, Lord of Black, swear." The moment he said that, the crest of Longbottom was pierced through by the black crest, and in a firework-like shower of silver and blue magic the magic settled. The alliance finally was completed. That had been 1.5 weeks ago. Now Sirius was back in Grimmauld Place, for the first time using the magic he had been taught by his relatives since he had been 13 and refused to learn more. But now Sirius had to admit that he had to actually know. He was the Lord of Black. He should know the magic of his house. With that thought, he took another deep breath before he started again, this time building the ward. The runes he drew in the air were glowing golden. It wasn't easy to build a ward, even after learning ancient runes in Hogwarts and ward schemes, thanks to his family grimoires. He was out of practice thanks to his time refusing to learn more about the ward and ward breaker schemes of the Black family, yet he was determined to learn what his grandfather and great-grandfather had been able to do to perfection. When the ward was established, Sirius centered himself again, using occlumency to calm his breathing and his thoughts and establishing a connection to his magic. The creature that was once part of his family line rose to the surface, filling Sirius with the phantom of its power. Again, Sirius raised his wand and drew the first rune to break the ward. A black-clad tiny flame rose from his wand and stopped at the outer side of the ward scheme. After that, Sirius centered himself again, an action he wouldn't have to do if he had a ward holder. Like that, slowly but surely he drew up the ward breaker before activating it with the last rune clad in black flames. The moment the ward he had drawn up beforehand broke, soft clapping could be heard from the entrance door to the attic. Sirius had used to practice. Sirius stopped, startled. His eyes snapped to the door, and for a second he feared to see Dumbledore or one of the Order in the doorway, but it wasn't the case. Instead, he saw something he had never expected to see ever again. The man leaning on the doorway was tall, dark-haired, and wearing clothes that spoke of his raising as the heir secundus of one of the most powerful families in the wizarding world. Silence. Sirius didn't know how long he stared, but he knew for a fact that he simply couldn't speak, even if he wanted to. In the doorway stood the man he had been thinking about just minutes ago, the man he had missed, the man he had wanted to have back and on his side since he had taken over the family. Reggie, the name was only whispered, and Sirius couldn't help but fear that the illusion in the doorway would vanish if he would speak it aloud. For a moment, the other man looked Sirius over, then he pushed himself off the doorway and stepped forwards towards Sirius. "Sirius," the illusion said, his voice darker and older than Sirius had ever heard. It was that thought that startled Sirius. A darker voice. An older voice. Reggie, his baby brother. The illusion was older than Sirius had ever known him. Reggie. Sirius couldn't help but repeat the name like a drowning person, their last pleading for help. He stepped forward, hesitatingly, and his deepest wish suddenly bubbling up his throat with every beat of his heart. One step, another, and another. And suddenly he was standing in front of the Fata Morgana he had never believed to see ever again, especially not at the age the illusion was right now. His brother was older, looking far more like Sirius than Sirius could have ever believed, and his eyes were marred by darkness. Sirius had never wanted to see in his brother's eyes. "Reggie," Sirius repeated again, his eyes not leaving his brother's face. The younger man looked at him, his eyes dark but warm in a way Sirius had never thought to see them looking at him. "Sirius," his brother repeated, and then Sirius had thrown his arms around Reg's neck, pressing his face into the shoulder of the brother who wasn't an illusion, who was real and warm and there. "Reggie," Sirius whispered, and for a second he wanted to apologize for not being there, for not pulling his brother out of Voldemort's circle, and then he remembered who and what his brother actually was, and he pushed his brother away and reached for his wand instead. Reggie just smiled sadly at him. "I've not been part of the Dork Lord's people since before the last war ended," he told Sirius, suddenly sounding old and tired. Sirius stopped reaching for his wand, but his eyes narrowed in suspicion anyway. "You weren't?" he asked harshly. "Not for a long time," Reggie assured him. "Not since I found something different, something better." That startled Sirius. He hadn't expected an answer like that. Not even in his dreams his brother had ever moved on from Voldemort, and even if he had, Sirius still couldn't see his brother on Dumbledore's side in any way or form. But then, his brother had said he had found something different, something better. He had never said that he had decided to go with Dumbledore's side in this war. He had only told Sirius that he wasn't on Voldemort's side anymore. And oddly enough, that was more than enough for Sirius. Or maybe not that oddly, considering that this was his brother. Still, that didn't mean that Sirius didn't want to know more. "Then what?" he asked, his little brother. And obviously that was enough. Even after 20 years, his brother seemed able to read Sirius just fine. Sirius wasn't sure if he would have been able to read his brother as well as Reggie after all this time. Reggie, on the other hand, seemed to see that as normal, and just sighed. I'm not actually sure what to tell you, Sirius, he said slowly, as if Sirius's asking was something he had already expected, and yet still unsure how to actually explain. How about the truth? Sirius suggested, his voice, now that he had remembered his brother's original alliance, a lot cooler than before. His baby brother looked at him for a second, clearly contemplating if Sirius was willing to actually listen, and Sirius couldn't help but feel like being stabbed in the heart at the thought that the distrust in his brother's eyes was actually warranted. Just weeks before, Sirius couldn't say that he would have actually listened to his brother's pleas after all, not before Sirius had finally decided to grow up and actually follow the footsteps of his family. Yet, Sirius couldn't object to the fact that his brother obviously had changed. Dork Lord, if that didn't say anything? For a second his brother stayed silent, then he sighed. I betrayed the Dork Lord when I found out I couldn't follow him anymore, Reggie replied. I nearly lost my life doing so, and I'm still working on his final destruction. Oddly enough, Sirius believed him, or maybe not as oddly, considering that Reg's eyes spoke of his truthfulness. Why? Why didn't you come back? Sirius asked, instead of accusing his brother of lying. Where to? Reggie countered, his eyebrow raising. Mother? She wouldn't have accepted me after me rejecting the Dork Lord. You wouldn't have listened to me if I'd tried to talk to you. There was grief in his brother's eyes at that, and yet it was the ache in Sirius's own heart that ensured that he stepped back up to his brother to hug him again. His brother was right. Sirius wouldn't have listened. At least back then, Sirius had been an idiot child, and even later on Sirius hadn't been any better. It was a heartbreaking thought, and he hugged Reggie a bit tighter just by the thought of it. Reg let him, and even started to return the hug after a second or two. So, you're back now, back on my side, back on the right side? Sirius asked, swallowing harshly, believing but still having to hear it anyway. His brother sighed and buried his head in Sirius' shoulder. I'm not on your side, Sirius, he sighed. I'm on Sal's side. I will always follow Sal. That stopped Sirius in his tracks. It was the second time his brother had spoken that name. A name that was an unknown to Sirius. Sala? He repeated the unknown name with a frown. The one who saved my life, Reggie answered. If he hadn't been, I'd be dead right now. Sirius swallowed harshly. Obviously it was that Sally he had to be thankful for the life of his brother. And he's against the Dork Lord, but not on Dumbledore's side, Reggie countered. For a second Sirius thought that over. Surprisingly, or maybe not considering his family history, the thought of not working for Dumbledore didn't bother Sirius at all. I'm allied with the Longbottoms, he finally said slowly. I hoped you would be, Reggie countered. You were the one who organized the alliance. Sirius understood immediately. It was the only thing that made sense. The Dowager's silence, the unknown heir, and the fact that Reggie was still alive and working against Voldemort. I was, Reggie agreed. You agreed to it? I did, Sirius assured him. I read Great-Grandfather's journal. I know now about our family, and I won't follow Dumbledore after Grandfather swore that no Black would ever work with him ever again. His brother smiled at that. So, Sal for you as well? He asked, hope and mischief in his eyes. Sirius hesitated. Months earlier he would have simply agreed, not even trying to think about the consequences. But now, after starting to try and follow his grandfather's and great-grandfather's example, he actually tried to think through to the consequences. I'm sorry, Reggie, he finally said. I can't say yes as long as I don't know who he is. I go with the Longbottoms, I go with Harry, but I can't promise to follow someone I have never met just because you like him. He was surprised when his brother smiled. That's more than all right with me, Sirius, Reggie replied, before stepping back out of the hug. So, you're back on my side? Sirius asked, hopeful, for the first time in his life actually actively hoping for someone of his family on his own side. His brother smiled hesitatingly at that. Something akin to that, at least. Reggie agreed softly. Akin to that might be good enough for that at the moment, Sirius said with a smile. His brother returned the smile and then stepped backwards again. Sirius watched his brother stepping backwards and opening the door, clearly intent on leaving. Reggie, he called after his brother. His brother stopped, his eyes meeting Sirius with the same warmth Sirius had seen at the beginning of that surprising meeting. "I'll come back, Sirius," his brother promised. "Not today, but I come back." "But," Reggie smiled. "I need to go," he said softly. "I've got a date with Sal tonight, another step to destroy the Dork Lord." Sirius stepped forward at that. "May I help?" his brother finished for him. "Not today, I'm sorry." That stopped Sirius short. Something must have been seen on his face, because his brother smiled softly at him. "I'm sorry, Sirius," his brother said. "Not this time around. If you want to help, you can do something different, but not this, sadly not this." For a moment, Sirius looked at his brother silently. Then he inclined his head. "All right," he gave in. "Not this time around, but tell me if you need me to do something, will you?" Sirius didn't have a lot of hope about that. His brother had been without him for about 20 years. There was no way that Reggie would turn to Sirius now after Sirius hadn't been there for him ever before. And like he thought, for a moment Reggie hesitated. Sirius already forced himself to resign to being on the outside, looking in because there was no way his brother trusted him, when from one moment to the other something changed in Reggie's demeanor. Suddenly Reggie smirked. "I might have something you can do, brother," he said. Sirius perked up, surprised at that. "What do you want me to do?" He wasn't about to promise anything, but at least listening to his brother was something he definitely could do. His brother's smirk broadened. "You might even like it, brother," Reggie said. "After all, it will be Marauder-like." And while Sirius has perked up even further, his brother returned to lean forward and whisper the details in his ears. "Marauder-like, definitively." "Potter?" Harry stopped on his way to the hospital wing to turn around and look at the approaching Mad-Eye Moody. It had been 3 days since the incident with the young Hufflepuff girl, and Harry had been on his way to do his daily checkup. "Lord Moody," Harry returned the greeting and inclined his head at the old aura. The man looked at him with narrowed eyes. "How did you know, Potter?" Moody asked, not even thinking about censoring himself. He was surprised when the boy stopped and then twisted his fingers a bit before flicking a rune away from him. The next second they were surrounded by a golden glow before the glow faded and nothing looked out of the ordinary again. "What was that, Potter?" Moody growled. The boy raised his eyebrow. "A runic ward to ensure that we won't be overheard," he replied coolly, "considering that I have no interest in airing some things in the middle of the hallways of Hogwarts. I saw it as prudent to do so." Moody stared at the boy coolly. "Secrets, Potter?" he asked him, icily. Potter looked at him in amusement. "I think you know the answer to that, Moody," he countered. "Our last discussion ensured that you know, after all. I give you the same data I gave Severus Snape. Albus Dumbledore knew Grindelwald since he was 17, and knew what that madman planned, yet the first time he acted was when he was 60. I don't blame him for not fighting. I blame him for keeping his silence. Albus Dumbledore also knew about Tom Riddle when that boy was still in school, yet he simply watched again. Do you see a pattern? Think about it." Yes, Moody remembered Potter's accusations. He remembered Potter's hatred for Dumbledore. "And yet I have still no idea how you knew about Sal Sanctuary," Moody said coolly. Potter grimaced at that name. "Sanctuary," he sighed. "Do you all have to add that name to Sala?" Moody raised an eyebrow at that. "That's what he was called," he pointed out to Potter. Potter sighed and closed his eyes. "I know," he grumbled. "I know." "You know a lot about that time, don't you, Potter?" Moody countered with narrowed eyes. "And it doesn't seem to be things that you should actually be able to know." Potter looked at him in amusement. "Like the fact that it was my grandfather fighting side by side with Sirius Black?" he asked, still clearly amused. "Or like how your father actually died?" Moody's eyes widened at that. "How?" he asked. Surprised, "Nobody could tell me how he actually died." "Nobody. There were people who could have been able to tell you," Potter replied. "Sadly, the most of those who could are already dead." Moody closed his eyes at that, feeling a bit bitter about the whole thing. "Mad Marius, Charles Potter, Arcturus Black, Newt Scamander, Garrick Ollivander, and Sal Sanctuary," he listed resigned. "Nearly all of them are dead." Garrick wouldn't know, Potter objected. The same for Scamander. And the rest is dead, Moody countered tiredly. In other words, the death of my father will for always be a mystery. For a moment silence reigned. Then Potter, having looked away just a second before, returned Moody's searching gaze. Tell me, Lord Moody, he asked, searching Moody's gaze. Tell me, what role do you think your father took in this whole war against Grindelwald? Moody frowned. He was a good fighter, he said, not sure what the boy wanted from him. He worked with Garrick Ollivander most of the time. He stopped and watched Potter's emotionless face. I'm not sure what you want me to say, Potter, he added in the end. The boy looked at him with earnest eyes. I want you to tell me the importance of your father in the war in the eyes of everybody else outside of the Resistance, he answered. Moody frowned. He was part of the Resistance. Doesn't that make him important, by default? He finally asked, the boy with a frown. Yes, Potter replied. He was part of the Resistance, but does that truly make him important? Moody opened his mouth to tell Potter that of course it made him important, just to close his mouth with a snap. What? He finally asked slowly. Are you babbling about, Potter? The answer was a serious gaze from the boy in front of him. Alaric, he said, using Moody's father's first name for the first time, startling Moody by his casual use of the name. Wasn't important. Moody growled at that. How can you? I can say that because it's the truth, Potter replied. Or do you truly think that your father was in any way or form important for anybody else but those who knew him? In the eyes of the world, Alaric Moody was nobody, just a footnote in history. His death wasn't recorded, because in the eyes of the world, his death didn't matter and will never matter. He was a soldier, one of many, not important except that he was part of the crowd, making his death only important in the fact that it added to the casualties of war. My father rescued Arcturus Black's life. Moody objected heatedly. The Blacks are one of the most important families here in Britain, especially for the dark side. I'm sorry, he died protecting me while I was trying to get my cousin to safety. The tired voice of a dirty and grim man in rags echoed through Moody's mind, a voice he remembered from when he was 10. It had been the worst day in his life back then, and yet it had shown him exactly what a man his father had been. We had planned ahead, but there were complications, and his father had died for the heir of Black. His father had sacrificed himself for the heir of Black. He rescued him, Potter agreed, his eyes dark with memories. He shouldn't have. And yet he died unknown to all but a few in the midst of the final battle, while everybody else was occupied by fighting against one enemy or the other. Nobody can actually tell me how he died, Moody shook his head, and yet, I know from my memory, he died defending Arcturus Black. One should mean that he would have been remembered for that. He was just one wizard in a war, Potter replied with a shrug. Nobody special, nobody important. But he's not important for history, Potter interrupted Moody darkly. I know that's hard to accept, but for history your father's just a number. His death won't be remembered, like the death of thousands of other soldiers will never be remembered. For a moment Moody wanted to object, but in the end he closed his eyes instead. It was hard, but he couldn't object Potter's assessment. His father had basically been a soldier, and like most of the soldiers, his name wouldn't be remembered by history except by those who had been close to him. And yet, as unimportant as my father has been for history, Moody concluded, you still know about him, you still know how he died. The answer was a serious gaze from the Potter heir. I do, he answered calmly. But then, I ensured that I at least know how those who fought died. It was the least I could do, the least to honor them even in death. Moody watched Potter closely after that admission. Why do you feel the need to honor those who fought and died in the war against Grindelwald? He countered, not quite sure what Potter was getting at. The boy looked at Moody, his eyes oddly hooded and old. That's the question, isn't it, Lord Moody? Potter replied and then shook his head. I'm sorry, but I won't be able to answer that. There has happened too much to give a simple answer. It is you who will have to find that answer yourself, like it's you who has to decide how you will continue to live from now on. Are you continuing on your path, following the man who got your father killed, or are you going your own way?" With that, Potter swept by him, clearly intending to leave Moody with that question. "Potter, wait!" cried Moody, stopping the lad before the boy could reach the outer part of the runic ward. "What do you mean Dumbledore got my father killed?" The boy turned, his eyes icy and oddly sad, almost grieving. "Tell me, Lord Moody," he asked instead of answering. "How else would you call it if it was one of Dumbledore's men who killed Alaric after Dumbledore and his men attacked both Grindelwald and his men as well as the Resistance, because they thought it right to add to a fight they hadn't been part of before?" That stopped Moody in his tracks. He paled. "Albus's men did kill Alaric, yes," Potter replied, nearly inaudible. "I'm sorry." And as much as Potter seemed to hate the headmaster of Hogwarts, Moody knew that that at least had to be the truth. Potter's eyes told him as much. It wasn't what Moody had wanted to hear, but as odd as it sounded, it was what Moody needed to hear, the truth. "So my father died protecting the heir of Black from Albus's men," Moody concluded, sounding suddenly tired. "And he won't be remembered for his deed except by us," Potter replied with a sigh. "But that's the fate of those small human heroes in the midst of a war far bigger than they will ever be." And wasn't that a sad thought? Before Moody could reply anything to that, Potter turned his back on him and flicked his wrist again, breaking the runic ward before leaving Moody behind. Moody, on the other hand, closed his eyes, unable to comprehend, unable to actually understand what he had been told. It would take time to sink in, to accept what he had learned, what he had heard about Albus Dumbledore and his men. Alaric Moody was dead because of the people Albus Dumbledore brought into a war he had declined fighting until the very end. Alastor Moody's father could have still been alive if Albus Dumbledore would have stayed as inactive as he had been before. And Moody, standing in the shadows of one of the hallways of Hogwarts, knew that he shouldn't blame Albus Dumbledore. The man had meant well, but then the road to hell was paved with good intentions. And maybe, just maybe, Albus Dumbledore had been heading to hell for a longer time than Moody had ever suspected. While Moody was still talking to Potter somewhere else near them, another meeting took place. "Poppy," Severus greeted, stepping into the office of the hospital wing. "Severus," she answered the greeting, looking him over concerned. "You don't look too good." Severus supposed that Poppy was actually understating his looks. He knew that he didn't look too good on his best days. Even he had to admit that he wasn't the prettiest thing that walked around. But for Poppy to comment on it meant that he looked worse than even his worst days. "I'm fine, Poppy," he replied, trying to assure the woman of his health. The nurse scoffed. "I'm quite sure you're anything but fine, Severus," she commented, looking at him seriously. "You look like you haven't slept since the day we saw Potter heal here in the hospital wing." Severus finished her sentence when she trailed off. The nurse looked at him, her eyes grave. "Yes," she agreed. Severus sighed. "I guess that's because I didn't, at least not truly," he replied truthfully, after contemplating his answer. Understanding filled Poppy Pomfrey's eyes. "It's hard, isn't it?" she asked with a sigh. "He's still so young, and yet—" "He's not young," Severus interrupted the nurse. He might have no idea what else Potter was, but from Potter's demeanor and the change he had finally realized had happened to Potter's character, there was no way that the boy, or the man looking like a boy, was still young. "He might look like it, Poppy, but he is—" The nurse looked at him with a frown at that, and Severus had actually no idea how to explain his thoughts about the mystery that was Potter. "He's not," he insisted instead. "He said it himself. He lived his life already. Just because he looks as if he hasn't doesn't mean that that's actually the truth." The answer was another sigh from the nurse. "I know what he said," she agreed, "and yet I can't wrap my head around it, like you can't wrap your head around it as well." "I actually can." "You desperately search for a way to heal him," Poppy analyzed him sharply, speaking up mid-word. "You try to save his life." "Because he won't?" Severus interrupted her harshly. "He won't. He's not concerned about his own health. He's not about to search a way to survive, so if I don't do it, there would be no one else to do it." Poppy stayed silent at that for a moment. Severus closed his eyes. He knew that he hated Potter, had once hated Potter. But he also knew that it had been his head of house had been the first to take Severus like he was, no trying to change him, taking all of him with all his sordid history. And Severus couldn't forget that this boy was willing to overlook their own shared history to give Severus a new home again. To hear that the one who had accepted him was about to die, it might have taken quite a bit of internal debate, but in the end, Severus was willing to overlook their past interactions and his own misplaced hatred for the boy as long as he was accepted into a family like he had never been before. Something of those thoughts must have shown on his face, because Poppy had a sudden understanding look on her face. "It's hard, isn't it?" she asked. "I'm not sure what has changed between you and Mr. Potter, but it's obvious that after your last interaction something has changed." Severus said nothing at that, but obviously that was enough. "No," Poppy said, crooking her head and reading Severus in a way that not even Albus Dumbledore was able to. Before that, something changed even before that for whatever reason. For a second, Severus continued to be silent. Then he sighed. "Potter remembers," he confessed. When Poppy raised an eyebrow at that, he forced himself to elaborate. "Lily." He wasn't able to say more, but it seemed that that was enough for Poppy anyway. "Ah," she said, before narrowing her eyes. "Just from his time as a child, or more." That thought actually startled Severus. He had never considered that Potter had actually lived in the time of the First War with Voldemort until now. Even knowing that Potter had been thrown back in time, he had never considered what that meant for Potter and his family. "I don't actually know," he said, startled. "I never considered—" He stopped speaking, but someone else spoke up in his place. "You never considered what, Severus?" Hearing that voice, both Severus and Poppy turned towards the entrance of the hospital wing. In the doorway stood Salvus Rendu Harry James Potter. "Sal," Poppy greeted him. The man trapped in a boy's body just looked at Severus questioningly, not acknowledging the greeting of the meaty witch. "Considered what, Severus?" he repeated. The potions professor sighed. "I never considered that you might have gotten to know your parents when you lived in the past," he replied a bit unwillingly. Potter crooked his head at him at that. "I'm not surprised that you didn't consider it," Potter replied, shrugging. "It's hard to grasp time travel, especially if you haven't lived it. There's also the fact that you lived that time as well and never got to know me. But you got to know your parents, didn't you, Sal?" Poppy asked him knowingly. Potter just looked at her in amusement. "I mostly got to know my grandparents," he replied, smiling amused at himself. "Not that I knew that my godson would turn out to be my grandfather one day when I agreed to be his godfather." Poppy nearly choked at that. "Wasn't Fleamont's father's best friend the godfather of his best friend? I think I remember something that my predecessor once told me about the boy. I forgot his name. Anyway, he was Henry Potter's best friend and the reason why Hogwarts is still standing after the Dark Lord of that time tried to take over here." Potter just looked at her in amusement and with a bit of sadness in his eyes. "All true," he agreed. "And the boy's name was Salvete Malfoy." There was a bit of bitterness in his eyes at that. "It's what my adopted parents named me." Then he shook his head. "It doesn't matter. It's all in the past now and has no influence on the present anymore." Severus narrowed his eyes. "Our past always influences our present," he replied coolly. "I think that especially you should know that considering your condition, Potter." The boy just smiled. "You're right, Severus," he agreed. "Yet you should never try to keep the past alive. If I had, I think I wouldn't be here anymore." He trailed off, his eyes far away and suddenly empty in a way. Severus had never seen Potter's eyes ever before, clearly remembering something that had happened a long time ago, something that nearly destroyed Potter back then. "No," Potter corrected himself finally. "I know I wouldn't be here anymore, and maybe knowing all this, I should stop my current path." Then he smiled, bitter and a bit tiredly. "Sadly enough, I can't," he said, his old eyes looking at his son's descendant and his many times successor as the healer of Hogwarts. "Maybe I'm a foul, but even I can't stop being human and having my own faults of character." He shook his head as if trying to forget something and then sighed. "Maybe telling you two a bit about my doings in the last war might help at least Severus to see the grand schemes of things a bit better." Again Potter shook his head. Or maybe it will just distract me while you two poke and prod me after I've taken a look at our young patient. He gestured towards the Hufflepuff girl's bed, hidden behind silenced curtains. You could also tell us what you plan to do with Umbridge, Severus added, watching Potter closely when he said that. To his surprise, Potter actually didn't even try to deny it. Not yet anything, he replied. I still need her to do something for me. The moment she's done with it, well, let's say there might be a bit more trouble for the ministry in the future. Then Potter smiled. But then I'm just a poor deranged 15-year-old, he added, grinning. There's no way I could do anything, is there? Severus didn't buy those words even for a moment. What exactly do you want her to do for you? He asked with narrowed eyes. Potter just smirked. Something my new proxy in the Wizengamot kick-started already, he replied. Don't worry, my heir, you will see. With that, he ignored any further questions and stepped up to take a look at his patient. Severus and Poppy exchanged a glance with each other behind Potter's back. Obviously, there would be more chaos in the future than they had both anticipated. Severus wasn't too sure if he should be afraid or looking forward to it. Sadly, it would take some more time until he would be able to decide. Meanwhile, Albus Dumbledore had trouble of his own. Trouble he hadn't foreseen when he left his bed this morning. Trouble he hadn't even thought about yesterday or the week before. If he was truthful with himself, he hadn't even accounted for trouble like that at all. At least not in the formal way he was facing it right now. Albus Dumbledore, you will now be escorted back to the ministry, where you will be formally charged, then sent to Azkaban to await trial. Albus Dumbledore had been through a lot of trouble in his life, but never through so much trouble like the one he was in now. And at fault for his trouble, sadly Albus Dumbledore could only blame one person, Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist and his damn article in the Quibbler, the Daily Prophet and the Witches Weekly. In other words, absolutely everybody in the British wizarding world had stumbled over that article in one way or other. And sadly, the article was anything but helping Albus Dumbledore's reputation. Of course, considering that there was currently an angry minister and his auras in Albus's office, as well as a smug-looking Dolores Umbridge, ready to take over Albus's place as headmaster, that last statement might have been a bit of an understatement. Nevertheless, Albus Dumbledore wasn't ready to give up and into the ministry. He said gently. Yes, I thought we might hit that little snag. And maybe calling his predicament a snag might be an understatement as well. On the other hand, Albus knew that for all his fighting with his deputy in the last month, she was still the best to look out for the children and Harry while he was gone, and go he must, considering that the minister wouldn't let him stay as long as he believed the lies Oliver Twist had told in his article, especially not with the formal document the minister had brought with him. When did the Wizengamot decide to force Albus Dumbledore out of Hogwarts? Being sent to Azkaban might be all alone. Fudge's decision, but the fact that Albus had lost his job had been a decision done by the Wizengamot as well. Albus has lowered his gaze to the copy of the document the minster had thrown at him when he had entered Albus's office, looking smug and assured in his position. Normally, Albus would have blamed the Death Eaters and Voldemort manipulating the whole thing to their wanted outcome. But this time around he had actually no idea what to think of it, because right at the top was one name that Albus Dumbledore, for all his suspicions, hadn't expected to see on a formal document like that. Potter. The Potter proxy had spoken for Albus Dumbledore's removement of Hogwarts. Impossible, Albus wanted to say. I might never have voted openly with the Potter votes, but I have been the proxy of that family for years already. And yet, the document in his hand stated that he actually wasn't, stated that someone else was and had always been. Because, while voting by letter could be done by someone actually not accepted by the ritual stone of the chamber the Wizengamot used to meet, going there in person and voting could always only done by the official proxy. It shouldn't be possible. A tiny voice in Albus's head told him, Sirius Black should have been the proxy, and after him nobody, because there's nobody trusted by the family who's closely enough related to them to take over proxy without Harry appointing them. And yet somebody had taken over proxy within the last months. because before, Albus knew for a fact that he had still officially, and maybe, considering the now-known proxy, a bit illegally had held the Potter proxy. And Albus couldn't help but wonder if it wasn't Oliver Twist's fault as well, that the true Potter proxy had decided to take up his place after more than a decade of not doing so. Damn Oliver Twist and his lies. Well, not everything had been lies, Albus had to admit to himself with a frown, but definitely the second part of the article. Yes, I answer to the headmasters and the founders, as if Albus had ever asked the Portage to tell him about the secrets of their families. But even Albus had to admit that while the implication that he had used the power of Hogwarts to keep in power outside of the school was absolutely wrong, it definitely was a possibility Albus would have been able to explore if he wanted to. Yes, Albus wasn't restricted by the oath of the founders, yet he had never ever acted unethical in any way or form. And yet, Fudge had taken the article and decided to use it to his advantage and ban Albus from Hogwarts, as well as take him into custody in the Ministry on the base of espionage on ancient families. "Snag?" said Fudge, his voice still vibrating with joy. "I see no snag, Dumbledore." That brought Albus out of his musing. Right, he couldn't contemplate what or who had led to that scene today right now. He had to stay focused, especially if he didn't want to end up in Azkaban like Fudge implied. This mess might ensure that I lose Harry fully. The thought hit him from one moment to the other. Harry was already fighting Voldemort, was already influenced by the connection between him and the Dark Lord, and if Albus wasn't there to steer Harry clear of the path Voldemort wanted him to take, if Albus wasn't there to monitor Harry, Albus couldn't help but think that chances were high that Harry would lose the fight against the darkness in his scar. Albus needed to stay. Albus needed to monitor, to control the boy's actions until the threat of Voldemort in Harry's head was dealt with. He couldn't trust Minerva to do right with the boy, while he had no trouble to give over the children and their safety to his deputy. Harry and his troubles would be too much for her, especially because she didn't understand the delicate nature of Harry's situation. She would be far too invested, far too concerned about Harry to let him be and live like he should be until he reached his fate. No, Harry, but then there was still Severus. The man might not have the best relationship with the boy, but at least Albus would be able to trust him to watch over the boy until Albus could ensure his return to Hogwarts, because returning he would. There was no way that he would be forced to stay away by the Ministry for too long. As long as he held the wards of Hogwarts, he would always be its true headmaster, and Albus doubted that the castle would take away his control of the wards after he spent his whole life to ensure Hogwarts' safety. His gaze swept to his phoenix on his perch in the corner. Fawkes, as long as the phoenix accepted him as the headmaster of Hogwarts, that was what he was. Something that Albus was sure wouldn't change for the time being, no matter what happened today, nor what would happen tomorrow. Albus banned those thoughts from his mind. Now wasn't the time. The consequences of this fallout would have to be thought over later as well. As much as Albus Dumbledore liked to brood about the loss of a lot of his plans right now, other things were more important. "I see no snag, Dumbledore." "Well," said Dumbledore apologetically, showing his soft and understanding side. "I'm afraid I do." "Oh, really?" Albus knew that Fudge wouldn't see the snag that Albus saw, because unlike Albus, Fudge had no idea that Albus was still and would ever be, as long as Hogwarts didn't revoke him itself, the headmaster of Hogwarts. And Fawkes would stand by Albus's side for all the time he was, because Fawkes was the phoenix of Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts. The phoenix had come to him the day Albus had taken up his post as headmaster, and Albus knew of phoenixes and their legends. A bond like that with a phoenix was ever only broken by death or betrayal, and Albus would never betray his phoenix. "Well, it's just that you seem to be laboring under the delusion that I am going to, what is the phrase? Come quietly. I am afraid I am not going to come quietly at all, Cornelius. I have absolutely no intention of being sent to Azkaban. I could break out, of course, but what a waste of time, and frankly I can think of a whole host of things I would rather be doing." And with that he reached out towards Fawkes, and his phoenix took the cue and flamed him away, leaving a stunned-looking minister and his lackeys in his wake. At least, Albus contemplated. Now I have time to look into the whole Oliver Twist thing and into Tom's Horcruxes. He would use his time sensibly, at least after he contacted Severus to ensure that the man would keep an eye onto young Harry Potter and the connection the boy obviously had and was influenced by Voldemort. The moment he landed in Grimmauld Place, he stumbled. For a second he felt oddly dizzy and like something was missing, then he shook his head and the feeling vanished as if it had never existed at all. Albus sighed. He had a lot to do. But first, Severus. It was then that Sirius stepped into the kitchen in which Albus had landed in. Sirius Black, oddly enough, was wearing formal robes, his expression grave and oddly severe. The moment he spotted Albus in his kitchen, his slumped and casual-looking figure rightened itself until he looked more like a lord than the Sirius Black Albus knew. "Sir," he greeted Albus Dumbledore coolly. Dumbledore frowned. "Sirius," he said, not sure how to take the change in the man he hadn't seen for nearly half a year. Albus had actually expected that being locked into Grimmauld Place might have negative consequences for Sirius's psyche, but he had never thought that Sirius might change into... Albus had no idea how to put it, but he couldn't help that the coolness in Sirius's eyes and demeanor was something he hadn't expected to ever see in the wild boy he had known since he was a boy. "Is there any reason why you are here in my home, sir?" Sirius asked him, still as cool and foreign as he had been before. "I remember you opened your house to the Order, Sirius," Albus reminded the other man. For a moment Sirius's eyes flashed and some kind of unwillingness showed in his face. Then every emotion vanished from the other man's face. "I did, sir," he replied, "but I recall that you weren't one of those who come by regularly." "Circumstances change," Albus answered with a sigh. "I need to contact Severus. He has to keep an eye on Harry as long as I'm unable to return to Hogwarts." Sirius raised a surprised eyebrow at that. "You are unable to return to Hogwarts, sir?" he asked with a frown. "There was a minor disagreement with the Minster," Albus replied with a sigh. Obviously the Minster somehow managed to ensure the Wizengamot's cooperation because they were involved with my forced resignation as a headmaster. When Sirius frowned even more, Albus waved it off. "I'm quite sure that I will soon return to my post," Albus said. "The Minister will soon understand that I am needed at Hogwarts, no matter the article of Oliver Twist or not." "Ah," Sirius said slowly, "the article in the Quibbler, I heard about that." Albus sighed. "Not the best one of the boy," he agreed, naming Twist a child. "Especially considering that those accusations aren't true at all. I would have never spied on any families and their secrets." To his surprise, Sirius just looked at him with cool contemplation. "But you could have been able to do so, couldn't you?" Sirius countered, and suddenly Albus Dumbledore knew who Sirius actually reminded him of. The cool demeanor, the iciness towards Dumbledore. This was a typical Black demeanor. Phineas Nigellus Black had been like that. Taurus Black had been like that. And Sirius Phineas Black had been like that as well. But why had someone who had broken ties with his family suddenly taken of characteristics of some of his old family members? Somewhere else in the country, in a manor, one Dark Lord was currently preoccupied with his sealing. If the Dark Lord had to admit to things, then he would have admitted that the sealing of the ballroom in his manor had currently taken precedence to every other plan he was about to hatch. Next to the Dark Lord, Bellatrix Lestrange Black, soon to be no name, stood also looking at the ceiling. "Are you sure agreeing to this alliance was the best thing to do, my lord?" she finally asked hesitatingly. "Crucio," Voldemort answered, ignoring her screams. Maybe it was the wrong reaction to something he didn't want to hear, but being a Dark Lord, Voldemort actually didn't care. Someone had to suffer, and Bellatrix had volunteered. Nevertheless, Voldemort's gaze didn't wander from his ceiling. Maybe, he guessed, agreeing to an alliance wasn't the best idea he ever had, but Anastasius Sanguini brought a connection to the vampires that Voldemort was hesitating to lose because of one unruly vampire. "Are you saying you don't like it?" said Vampire asked in that moment. "I thought that at least my dear nephew would appreciate my sense for colors." Voldemort just fired another Crucio towards the vampire, not even expecting it to hit anymore. The vampire just cackled and ducked. Meanwhile, the Dark Lord just continued to stare at his ceiling. It was black. Absolutely black. The color wouldn't be too bad, even if a bit depressing, and not something the Lord of the Manor would appreciate. The dark marks with the little pink snakes, spitting hearts coming out of the skulls on the other hand. Sanguini. Voldemort finally managed to get out, and Sanguini cackled before spinning around, fleeing. I thought I would ensure that my dear nephew feels homey when he comes. He called out over his shoulder while running, and I thought you might appreciate it too. And while Voldemort was busy hurling curses at his vampire ally, he never noticed that from all the Death Eaters freed from Azkaban, 3 had gone missing without a trace. Harry took a deep breath. He had his eyes closed and was currently deep in the bowels of Hogwarts, hidden away in a room that was neither the Chamber of Secrets nor any other known room to the people living in the castle. Even the headmasters seemed to have forgotten this room existed. The room was empty, but that just helped Harry in this case. All around the room, runes and other symbols had been drawn, building a complex scheme of safety and protection. Harry was in the middle of the scheme, sitting on the cold stone floor, his eyes closed. He was deep in his mind, concentrating on a part of him that he hadn't accessed in centuries. The part that was actually connected with the wards of Hogwarts. So this is how we see each other again, a voice suddenly said, nearly pulling Harry out of his concentration when it startled him. Harry opened his eyes and looked at the man who had suddenly materialized in front of him. The man was old, his hair white, but his eyes, they were so familiar, achingly familiar and warm in a way. Harry hadn't seen eyes for what seemed to be a long time now, looking at him. Atrat, he breathed, barely managing to produce a sound at all. Salvazaha, the man returned the greeting, and then smiled at him with his archingly familiar face. I see you managed to return to where you belong now. Harry's eyes started to burn. I did, Uhtred, he assured the man. But you miss me, the man concluded what Harry couldn't say. You found others who cared for you, others who loved you, yet you still miss me. You were the first I actually truly remember loving me. Harry replied truthfully, and when the man raised an eyebrow at him, Harry made an impatient gesture. Yes, I remember my parents and Sirius loving me, but those memories came after I found you. So even if they were theoretically first, for all I try to tell myself different, you are the first to love me in my mind. Merlin just shrugged. If you look at it in a timely manner, I definitely was the first, he countered fondly, and Harry nearly choked on his laughter. That, too, he agreed. There was a fond look in his Atra's eyes at that. I understand that you missed me, Salvazaha, he said, but you have long since learned to live without me. Harry couldn't object to that. Instead, he sighed. You're right, I have, he agreed with a sigh. But that doesn't mean that I didn't miss you. Like you have missed all loved ones who you lost, his Atra agreed. Yes, Harry said with a sigh, before closing his eyes tiredly. But I'm tired again. Merlin frowned a bit at that. Salvazaha, this time there was concern in his voice. Harry opened his eyes again and looked at his father, self-conscious, smiling. Don't worry, Atra, he said. I won't leave Reg, not until I actually have to. For a moment, Merlin just looked at the man his son had become. Then he reached out, his ghostly hand touching his son's locks, and kissed Harry's forehead. It's your choice, my child, he said. It has always been your decision to make, my child. Harry snorted at that. Not that much of a decision this time around, he countered. I'm dying, and there's nobody to stop it. Your heir tries, his Atra pointed out, and Harry acknowledged it with a nod. But he doesn't understand rituals, and he doesn't understand that there is nothing to stop a mistake like the one I made. Harry countered. A mistake you didn't truly try and prevent yourself from making, Merlin countered, his face severe but also understanding. Harry looked away. I'm old, but that doesn't mean that I don't make mistakes, Harry replied, not looking at his Atra. I didn't think about the change in my runic connection with Tom Riddle after his return to the living when I started the ritual. Yet, you didn't truly try to save yourself when you noticed. There was no accusation in Merlin's voice, just understanding. Harry turned his head away. My death won't be senseless no matter what you say, a tree countered. The moment I noticed I couldn't have prevented it anymore. There's just one chance in a ritual, and you know that." "I know," his H replied. "Yet you survived a botched ritual once already." For a moment Harry didn't answer, but then his eyes closed in remembrance. "You mean I survived what I shouldn't have?" he countered. "I survived my rash decision to save my godfather Nicholas, like I survived my own try to kill myself. I shouldn't have. Not the later one which only Peverell prevented, and definitely not the first that didn't have anybody preventing it at all." There was silence for a second between them, but then Harry opened his eyes to look at his Atrit. "I never understood how I survived what should have cost my life," Harry spat. "All the rules of magic I learned, all the rules of magic I discovered, and yet something prevented all those rules from taking effect that day. I never understood, I will never understand, and I don't believe that I will have that much luck again this time around. Rituals are deadly if they go wrong. This is one of the rules I learned to live with. This is one of the rules you taught me to accept." "That I did," Merlin agreed and petted his son's hair again. "Those are the same rules I had to accept when I started to learn magic." Harry leaned into his Atra's touch. "Then why did I survive?" he whispered, his eyes closed and unwilling to look into his Atra's eyes. "Because that's what you chose," Merlin answered, his eyes warm and sad. "You were a gift to me, Salvasar, a gift I greedily tried to keep until my own end, but just because you were a gift for a while, you weren't for me to keep. You have always been a gift for all those whose life you touched throughout your life. You were a gift, but a gift is given by somebody." Harry looked at Merlin with a frown. "I'm not sure I understand," he whispered. Merlin just smiled. "You're born a grim, Salvasar," he said. "I might have not known while I lived, but in all that time you lived I could see it stronger every day. Your ability and wish to heal and to protect, your fierce determination to ensure a balanced world, even your destiny to fight the man who killed your parents. All that just tells me that you were born a Grim, the only true Grim since the man who held that title first." Harry looked at his Atra in amusement at that. "I'm not sure if you didn't start to live in a fantasy world some time after you died," he said, amused. His father ruffled his hair. "Oh, child," he countered. "My precious child, just promise me you will choose your future for yourself, and not because you think that choosing like you do is the right way for everybody else." Harry looked up when he heard that. "Are you here just to ask that of me?" he asked, looking at his H with tired eyes. Merlin smiled at him. "Not just because of that," he answered his son, ruffling the other's hair again. "But I want my son to choose his own fate. I always wanted my son to be his own man, even if that means that I will have to sit by and watch my son choose death when I want him to continue living." Harry sighed. "I didn't actually choose. I'm not talking about Halloween," his Atra interrupted him. "Your choice is yet in your future. Halloween, it was meant to be. It was foreshadowed long before, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. I guess this sounds familiar to you." "The prophecy," Harry said. "So you know the contents of the prophecy, my child?" Merlin asked, a bit amused. Harry just shrugged. "I do," he agreed. "I usually don't play in a game I don't know the rules of." His father raised an eyebrow at that. "And I thought you had no idea what the Order of the Phoenix," there was amusement in Merlin's eyes when uttering the name, "was guarding." "Oh, I didn't," Harry agreed, amused. "But then it's not as if Hogwarts has truly kept me, and if I wanted to leave and take a look at something I want to see, there would have been nothing stopping me to go where I wanted to." "So you took a look at the prophecy," his father concluded, amused. Harry smiled at his father tiredly. "What else should I have done?" he countered. "I don't play a game where I don't know all the rules." "I know," his Atra agreed, smiling at his son fondly before his eyes turned serious. "But you know what the prophecy means, don't you, my son?" "I do," Harry agreed, closing his eyes again, bitter from the understanding he had gained the moment his father had repeated that one part of the prophecy to him. "My death, the one I'm currently facing in a not-so-distant future, it's one way to the fulfilling of the prophecy." "It might," Merlin agreed, his face full of understanding. But it's just one way, not the only way. Harry just looked at his father fondly at that. I know it, he told Merlin. Don't worry, I won't stop my path now, just before ending it in the way I want it to end. And when you're gone? His father countered, yet still looking at Harry in understanding. Harry just returned his look calmly. Then Severus and Regulus will take the lead, Harry replied. Regulus has been trained by me for years and Severus has learned to trust me. He will know to trust Reg before my end as well. The world will be as safe as I can make it long before if I have a say. Anyway. His H closed his eyes at that, keeping his silence. It hurts you to think of my end, Harry interpreted his father's look. Marden just sighed. You're my child, Salvazar, he replied, and while I know that you lived far longer than I ever did, that doesn't change the fact that I will forever prefer you to be alive than to know you're dying. Harry inclined his head at that. I know what you mean, Artrat, he agreed, his eyes now open and sympathetic. Just to think about Anna's potential death, it's something I can't bear. He's my son. I will never want him to die, even if I know that he's older than everybody else from his race, and that it would be his right to say that he has enough of living. At that, Merlin laughed quietly. You're right, Salvazar, he agreed. But unlike me, it is most likely that you won't ever have to fear about your son giving up on life. Anastasius, I can't imagine him ever having enough of living to try and end his life. Harry just smiled. How right you are, Etot, he agreed, his thoughts with his wayward son. How right you are with that Gryffindor son of mine. Then he focused on his father again. All right, he said, suddenly sure of what he wanted to say. For you I will choose my future carefully. I will think it over, and in the end I will decide on the one thing I can live with, no matter what others want or need from me. If I ever get the chance to survive this, then I at least promise to think about my possibilities before deciding this final time. Merlin just ruffled his hair again. And that's the only thing I can ask of you, he agreed, but then hesitated. Well, that's not totally true. There's something else I want to ask you. Harry frowned. At rate, it's no request for you to stay alive, his father hurriedly countered. Nor is it anything else that you should feel hard to do. It's just, I want you to change your ward scheme, the one you want to apply to Hogwarts today. Harry's eyes narrowed. You want me to change it, how? He asked, mistrust in his eyes. He didn't believe his father tried to destroy his work, but he still feared that his father might want him to add a loophole for Harry himself to the wards. I want you to bind yourself into the ward scheme, his father replied, his eyes serious when they searched out Harry's own. I want you to change the wards you want to apply into a new layer of blood wards, a new protection disconnected from the soul wards and the blood wards of your founder friends. For a moment, Harry wanted to object to that idea. Another layer of blood wards, another dangerous layer of magic over the school, another protection for the children. That last thought was the reason he stopped before speaking and actually started to think about his father's request. You don't ask just for the blood wards, he understood a moment later. You want me to hide the school in case there will be an attack. If you already have to die, use your death, his father countered, his voice severe. And if you don't, then the new blood wards surrounding the school will help anyway. Harry closed his eyes again, thinking everything over. He knew that Tom Riddle had an interest in Hogwarts. He knew that even if he managed to confront Tom Riddle elsewhere, chances were that an attack on the school would take place at the same time. And the school, the children would need every bit of protection he had to offer. There were the old soul and blood wards. Harry was reactivating the moment the Horcrux was gone, but what if they weren't enough? Could he really refuse one last kind of protection to the school when he was already willing to offer up his life to rid the wizarding world of Tom Riddle? He couldn't. And with that thought, his hand reached for his knife, adding his blood to the ritual around him. His Etra smiled. I knew you would never give up this school into the hands of others who showed that they didn't deserve it, he said, his ghostly features slowly but surely melting into nothing. Thank you, my child. And with that he was gone, leaving Harry in the middle of floating runes and symbols, every symbol, every rune glowing in the light of Harry's magic. Harry opened his eyes, his mind losing its concentration, and the new ward for the school snapped into place, binding Salazar Slytherin and Salazar and Meras a third time to the most basic and at the same time deepest wards of Hogwarts. A second later, the newest ward began to pulse and started to work, drenching the whole castle in its magic while searching for darkness, lingering under its protection. And while the visible effects of the wards faded, leaving Harry behind in darkness, the wards spread throughout the castle, cleaning the darkness from every corner and every alcove. Harry, meanwhile, closed his eyes again, his mind still reeling with the encounter he had with his essence, bound to the old, currently nearly inactive wards. 48 hours at most, he whispered to the echo of his father's soul. Then Camelot will be free of every ounce of darkness within its walls again. 48 hours and one Horcrux, because the moment the ward would find magic it couldn't counter, like the Horcrux, Harry would be alerted and he would remove it. 48 hours and the Horcrux would finally be theirs. When Harry emerged from the room he had hidden himself away in for the ritual, he was met with an enraged headmistress in the entrance hall to the castle. "Mr. Potter!" she croaked sweetly. "Where were you?" Harry looked at the pink-wearing woman innocently. "Outside," he replied. "I didn't have any lessons this afternoon, and so decided to wander the grounds." The pink woman's eyes just narrowed. Ever since Albus Dumbledore had been forced from the castle, she had been out to get Harry in even more trouble than she already tried him to be in before. It was so bad that Madame Pomfrey and even Severus had lied for Harry a few times already, without even asking where he had been, just to get him away from that woman's punishments. Harry just wasn't sure with those two if they were removing him from the Toad to keep him safe, or if they were removing him to keep the Toad safe, or something like that at least. Harry heavily suspected, at least in Severus's help, an experiment on how long that pink woman would need to explode if he kept removing the object of her wrath without giving her the chance to object, or an experiment how long it would take for Harry to be fed up with that woman and make her explode. Considering the current color of the woman currently looking at Harry, no matter which experiment Severus was actually conducting, it was heading to an end. Either the woman would explode because of her continued ability to find anything against Harry that might force him out of Hogwarts, or Harry would do it just to get rid of the owly ambushes the woman had conducted on him for the past 3 days. "I don't believe that you were simply outside, Mr. Potter, were you?" The new headmistress without an office said. Hogwarts had refused to open the office of the headmaster for her, and instead forced her to continue to use the office she had as a defense professor. "Where else should I have been, Madam Umbridge?" Harry countered, while looking at the woman calmly. 47 hours. Umbridge stared at him, her eyes burning with hatred, but obviously she had no evidence that he had been anywhere else but where he said he had been, because she didn't answer at all. Instead, it merely looked as if she was emitting steam from her ears. "You, Mr. Potter, have detention with me tonight," she spat out finally, "for disrespect and lying." Harry just raised an eyebrow at the woman. "I don't think I have ever been disrespectful to you, madam," he countered, "and I'm not sure how you can accuse me of lying when I tell you I was outside shortly after I actually entered the halls through the door leading outside the castle." "I am the headmistress, Potter," she countered immediately. "If I say you were disrespectful, then you were disrespectful." Several students around her frowned at that but said nothing. The most of them had learned over the last few days that her detentions were no laughing matter. Harry just stared at the woman unimpressed. "Is that so, madam?" he said, his eyes never leaving those of the pink-clad woman. "That is so, Potter," she assured him, her face nasty. Harry just inclined his head. "If that was all, madam?" he asked, and when she continued to stay silent, he stepped around her and left. 47 hours left. "Have a good day, madam," he said before rounding one of the corners. "I hope you enjoy it because it will be one of your last here." And if his words had called it force, the clock in the entrance hall decided to announce the new hour. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. When the first people entered Grimmauld Place, Albus Dumbledore was already waiting for them. Since he had returned here in the early hours of the morning, just 2 days before Hogwarts ended for this semester, he had been surprisingly alone. He had no idea where Sirius had hidden himself away, but fact was that Albus hadn't seen hide nor hair from the younger man for the whole day, until the Weasleys arrived for the order meeting.
"Albus, I'm surprised you all called us here today. Shouldn't you be at school?"
Albus Dumbledore sighed at Arthur Weasley's question. "Come in first, my boy. I will explain everything as soon as everybody is here and seated," he finally replied, not too sure what he should answer. Being thrown out of Hogwarts wasn't something Albus had expected for at least another month. Oh, he had no illusion that Fudge wanted him out, especially because the minister partly blamed Albus for Oliver Twist and his sheenings, but Albus hadn't expected the man to act so soon. Yet here he was, thrown out of Hogwarts and trapped in that dark house he had designated as the meeting place of the Order of the Phoenix. Having to confess something like that as well, let's just say that Albus wasn't the happiest person around right now. Yet, being thrown out of Hogwarts didn't bother Albus just because he had been thrown out. It also bothered him because of the political ramifications. Something utterly unforeseen must have had changed for Albus to lose his post without even a slight previous warning at all. But it couldn't be. Albus had the voting rights for not only the Blacks but also the Potters as well as the Founders under his control. He should have been warned. Given the Founders' votes were more of a formality, not a true place in the Wizengamot, but the Potters and the Blacks were definitely his to vote. Albus had made sure of it after Lily and James Potter, as well as Arcturus Black, had died. It hadn't been easy, but he had been able to find proof that he had been considered a close friend to the Potters, and as long as there were no actual relatives that could claim the vote, something only possible with the agreement of the heir, and Harry was still too young to know about his family's standing in the Wizengamot, Albus Dumbledore, as a close friend of the Potters and a known and admired war hero, had the only way to gain access to the votes of the Potters, and therefore of the Blacks as well, considering that Arcturus left the lordship of Black to his heir, and with Sirius being incarcerated at that time, unable to claim it, the vote had gone to his own heir, Harry. Yet, somehow Albus hadn't been notified. But how? Sirius wasn't officially considered a criminal anymore, but as long as he didn't claim lordship, something that he would never do considering how much he loathed his family, the votes would stay with Albus, so there shouldn't have been a change there. But Sirius changed. Albus remembered before dismissing his memory of the cool and collected Sirius Phineas Black, looking at Albus from Sirius Orion Black's face back at Albus from his mind. It had to have been a play of the light. The man couldn't have changed so much. The man loathed his family after all. Yet he looked like his namesake, the traitorous part of Albus's mind reminded him, or like Arcturus at the height of his power. Albus shuddered. Arcturus Black had been a formidable man, utterly dark and entrenched in the darkest of magics, but also formidable in a way that made Albus still shudder when thinking of him, even all those years after the other man's death. It definitely wasn't a good sign that Sirius Orion Black had reminded Albus of that dangerous man. His thoughts were interrupted by the man himself, finally willing to resurface after vanishing last night. Sirius Black stepped around the corner of the kitchen. He was clad in fancy robes, the ones normally just worn by a head of house, and his long hair was actually braided in the way of the lords of old. If Albus had ever thought that Sirius's previous appearance had been a play of the light, he was now proven wrong. The man entering the kitchen definitely didn't look like Sirius Orion Black at all. But Sirius Phineas Black, yes. That man could be a return of that pure-blood prince of old without even trying. Obviously, Albus wasn't the only one noticing the change in Sirius's clothing and behavior. "Sirius," Arthur said, surprised. "You look good." "Thank you, Arthur," Sirius replied, and his eyes settled on Lupin, who was currently choking on his water after seeing his friend. "What the hell happened to you, Padfoot?" The man finally choked out after managing to spread water over half of the table. Sirius gestured with his empty hand, and the loathsome house elf appeared, muttering about great masters finally returning to their ancestry, before cleaning the table and refilling Remus's glass of water without complaint. Remus just stared at his glass of water as if the house elf had poisoned it before putting it down on the table hastily. "Nothing happened to me, Moony," Sirius answered and sat down in one of the chairs. It was the one at the head of the table. A second later, another glass of water was standing in front of Sirius on the table. But Remus Lupin stuttered, but was interrupted by the strange man who had once been Sirius Black immediately. James was the one who said it was finally time to stop playing around and grow up, Sirius said, and there was the same grief in his voice he always had when talking about the last of the true marauders. I didn't want to listen back then, but I decided to listen to him now. It's time that I stop playing around. I was incarcerated without being convicted. I fled and I was hunted. Now I am free again. And maybe it's time to accept that fooling around won't win us the war. So you what? Pulled out your grandfather's robes and decided to play serious for once? Lupin asked with a frown. Sirius looked at the ceiling thoughtfully. No, he said. The robes are only to remind me that I have changed. The true change is somewhere else entirely. Like I said, I'm done playing around. It's time that I finally step up and do something for a change. So, what did you do? Arthur asked interestedly. Albus also listened, wondering if Sirius had taken on his seat and therefore lost Albus his pre-warning about his loss of position. I trained, Sirius replied, and I will continue to train. This time around I won't sit by and watch my brother die. From the faces of those who had already been there at the beginning of the discussion, or had entered after that, nobody had the heart to remind the dog Animagus that he was already too late with his pledge. His brother, after all, was long since dead. That's a good idea, Arthur said instead, not pointing out that James, the only brother Sirius ever acknowledged as long as Arthur could remember, was already gone and would not return no matter what Sirius did or didn't do. But how about we start this meeting now? Sirius frowned for a second, but then his face smoothed out and he nodded. Of course, he agreed. Now that all are here, we truly should start. Before Albus could object that they weren't all there and that Severus was still missing, the man himself slipped into the room silently. For a moment Snape looked at Black, but the half-formed sneer vanished from his face before it even truly materialized. Instead he nodded at Black shortly, and then concentrated on Albus. Albus thought that behavior odd, but decided to ignore it for now for more pressing matters. "My dear Order members," he said, "I must confess to have asked you to come here because of one incident especially, the fact that I was forced out of Hogwarts." Tumult was the answer to that declaration. The only ones silent were Black, who wasn't looking surprised at all, Alistair, who looked as if he hadn't listened at all, and Severus, who already knew. "Yes, I am aware that this is an unseen setback for us, but we simply have to rely on the other teachers to keep the children safe while I'm forced to stay gone for a while. Don't worry, friends. I still have the control over the wards, and as long as Hogwarts doesn't withdraw them from me, I'm still the rightful headmaster of Hogwarts." Just why did those words feel like a lie in his mouth? Meanwhile, Severus will keep Harry safe, and we will keep the prophecy safe. And why was Severus looking at Albus with so much hatred in his eyes? Nearly as much hatred as he might have shown if Albus had proclaimed Lily to be safe after her death. "I'm quite sure that as long as we work together, I will return to my post sooner than later, maybe even in the next Wizengamot meeting." And why was Sirius looking at Albus with that odd look that Arcturus had shown shortly before he had refused Albus's hand of friendship and camaraderie after the war with Grindelwald? "And the moment I'm back, I will do my best to keep our children safe from Tom again." Why did Alistair frown at that? Or wasn't he listening to Albus's words at all, and the frown had appeared because of something else? Until then, we should ensure that the prophecy in the Department of Mysteries will never be without a guard 24/7. Voldemort might use our distraction and our feud with the Ministry to ensure that he gains access to the prophecy, after all. And why didn't Arthur nod along like he normally did and instead was looking at his watch? Albus took a deep breath and put out from his mind. Instead, he went on to the individuals' schedules. "Arthur," he said, "I want you to guard the prophecy on the day before Christmas. People won't question you when you stay longer to finish your work, especially if you say it's that or working on Christmas if they do ask." Arthur nodded. "Of course," he said. "Don't worry, I will keep the prophecy safe." "Severus," Albus said, and the dour man looked at him unhappily. Keep an eye on Voldemort's plans and on the students, will you? Of course, Headmaster, the unhappy man agreed and looked away, clearly brooding. Sirius. The man looked at Albus with a frown. You and Remus stay here over Christmas. I know you've been cleared and you might yearn for something to do, but we should give it another month or two before adding you to our plans, just to be on the safe side. Sirius definitely didn't look happy at all at that, but Remus answered for them both. Of course, Headmaster, I will keep an eye on him. The answering look Sirius shot the other marauder was nearly a dare. Try it, it said. Alastor, Moody's eyes opened. Had that man even listened to one thing Albus had said? I want you to take a look who actually voted for my removal from Hogwarts. We must know who else has been brought over to Tom's side before the next meeting of the Wizengamot in a few weeks. I'm concerned about some people. Some weeks ago, Augusta Longbottom has been seen talking to the now late Narcissa Malfoy, and I fear for her and her grandson. For a moment Alastor stared at Albus blankly, then slowly he nodded. Of course, Albus, he said, and abruptly stood up. If you excuse me now, I have a lead to follow. And with that he was gone, leaving a totally flawed Albus Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix in chaos. Only Sirius Black leaned backwards grinning, enjoying the tumult around him. Oddly enough, the only ones who shared his smiles briefly were one Arthur Weasley, and one, even if his smile was more a grimace than an actual smile, Severus Snape. But Albus didn't notice, too stunned by the odd behavior of one of his oldest friends to even notice the odd silent conversation going on right under his nose. What by Merlin had gotten to Alastor that he had acted that much out of character for him today? The chamber was only lit by a few green lights when they met again. It was the same day the Order would be meeting in the evening, and actually it wasn't just daytime but also in the middle of the school day for once. So, Regulus said, leaning on one of the stone snakes in the Chamber of Secrets. You called me here? I did, Harry agreed, not bothering to stand up from the floor he had sat on while waiting for Regulus to appear. The wards alerted me to the location of the Horcrux about an hour ago. Regulus looked at Harry in amusement. And you want to go now? He asked. Shouldn't you be in class currently? Harry just shrugged. I should, he agreed. But I doubt that Umbridge will miss me, and even if she does, Harry shrugged again. I guess she will have to live with me not coming today. So you want to go now? Repeated a bit disbelievingly. No, Harry replied. Not now. Tonight. It would take too long to go now, but I want you to go and have a look already. So you want me to wander the castle as a cat, while looking for what? Bragg asked with a raised eyebrow. Looking for the signature of the Horcrux. That will guide you. Adert. Harry grimaced at the mispronunciation. Regulus managed to produce, is the castle, isn't it? Harry grimaced again at the rest of the sentence, but then he sighed. Ettrack, he corrected the word, with rolled eyes. Means father, as in the soul, who offered up the rest of their essence, their life to keep this castle safe once. Their essence, basically, is the foundation the wards of the castle are based on. Oh, Regulus said. So, I follow father's guidance. Harry just sighed again. How about you call him Merlin, he suggested. Or Merlin if you can't pronounce the other name as well. It sounds odd if you say father, because then I keep looking around for... Never mind. Reg rolled his eyes again. Mirrodin it is, he agreed. So how does he guide me? And show him? Considering that Reg hadn't expected to get a sudden mental urging to go to a specific place he had never heard of before, it was definitely a frightening demonstration. Oh, all right, he said, shuddering. Follow the creepy feeling, I get it. Harry looked at him a bit amused. If you want to call it that, he agreed, before turning to the entrance of the chamber. And now come, I don't have all day. Transfiguration will start in 20 minutes, and I have no intention to come too late for that. Reg just rolled his eye at the other man. Do you know how odd that sounds, considering how often I've seen you use transfiguration without a second thought? To think that you're actually going into fifth-year transfiguration lessons after that. Well, it's somehow funny, you know. Harry just looked at Reg in amusement. Doesn't matter, he replied. I'm not about to be late. Now hurry up. Reeks grumbled a bit at being treated like a child, but turned into a black cat, nevertheless, and then jumped on Harry's shoulder. Together they left the chamber. It was only on the 3rd floor that they parted, and while Harry continued on to his transfiguration lessons, Regulus started to slowly pinpoint where Merlin was actually leading him. It would take some time, but 10 minutes before dinner, Regulus would have finally traced the signature of the Horcrux to the room of requirement. Until then he had found the curse on the defense position, some other dark objects and some other hidden curses that had all been too dark for the wards to remove the taint themselves. 10 minutes after dinner he would rub himself on Harry's trousers and then vanish with the boy into an unused classroom. "I found it," Reg said the moment he had changed back. Harry smiled. "I already guessed as much," he answered. "Tonight then, 3 o'clock. We meet in front of the fat lady." Regulus nodded and changed back into a cat. A second later, a cat and a boy left the classroom again, the cat to wander the halls and find something to eat in the kitchen, and the boy to return to his friends who had been waiting for him with a frown on their faces, just a corner away. With them, Harry returned to Gryffindor Tower. The rest of the day he used to play chess with Ron and to do his homework. He went to bed at midnight and waited until it was 3 o'clock in the morning before he left his bed again. Then he slipped on his invisible clock and pocketed the Mordar's map before he left the common room. Outside, the Redcat was waiting. "Let's go," Harry whispered, and Redcat started to hurry through the corridors until they reached the 7th floor. There he meowed at the wall opposite the tapestry depicting the attempt of Barnabas the Barney to teach Toll's ballet. "The come-and-go room." Harry breathed in recognition. Then he sighed and laid a hand on the wall where the entrance of the room was hidden. "Open," he hissed, in Parseltongue, not bothering to do it the hard way. The entrance appeared and Harry entered. Inside was an utter chaos. As soon as the entrance door closed behind them, Reg turned human again and looked around. "I never knew there was such a messy place in Hogwarts," he said. Harry sighed. "I do not know who put all the stuff in here, but I know that the Horcrux we are searching is hidden somewhere inside." Regis snorted. "Of course it is. I followed its trails as soon as I was able to," he huffed. "I know," Harry answered and looked around unhappily. "This might take months." He didn't even have to say aloud that they didn't have months to search for the Horcrux. "What will take months?" another voice asked from behind them. Harry and Regulus turned startled. Behind them Ron and Hermione were standing, both wearing nightgowns. "What are you doing here?" Harry stared at his friends unhappily. He had assumed that they were asleep and hadn't bothered to actually look out for a tale therefore, especially considering that Dumbledore was out of school and Umbridge preoccupied with some pranks from the twins. "We followed you, mate," Ron answered. "Or do you think we would miss it if our friend continues to behave weirdly?" "We were worried about you," Hermione added. In her hand she had her wand, pointing it at Reg's chest, and I think there might have been a good reason for that as well. "Who is he? Is he threatening you? Are you imperious?" Harry rolled his eyes. "Neither, Hermione," he answered, and looked at Regulus. "What will you tell them?" the older-looking man asked interestedly. "Actually," Harry answered, shrugging, "I have no idea. What do you think I should tell them?" Hermione's wand shot sparks at that while still being pointed at Regulus's chest, and Ron had also drawn his wand and was now pointing it unsurely between Harry and Regulus. "Maybe you should give them pointers in appearing more threatening," Regulus suggested, sounding quite relaxed considering that Hermione's wand was pointed at his chest. Harry rolled his eyes at him. "Maybe you should do it," he countered. "You're the idiot who doesn't fear the wand in the hands of the witch." Before Regulus could counter that, Hermione spoke up again. "I think you should explain what you are doing to Harry," Hermione said, still eyeing Regulus distrustfully. "Now, or I'll stun you and Ron will go to Dumbledore." Hermione," Ron said slowly. "You do remember that Dumbledore isn't at Hogwarts anymore, do you?" Before Hermione could say anything to that, Harry groaned. "Wonderful," he said. "Now she will want to debate which other teacher might be a good idea to take us to if Dumbledore is out." Regulus just looked at Harry amused. "As if you would ever let her take you anywhere," he countered. "I don't think I can remember even one instance when you let a child decide what you had to do." Harry just looked at Reggie fondly at that. He said, but I listened to a child before. You might be more than 2,000 years too late to see it, or maybe just a few months. But anyway, I actually once listened to a child when it came to making important decisions. Regulus just snorted. May I guess that you listened to one when you were the same age, instead of all the other dates you mentioned? He countered, still amused. Harry shot him a short, clearly entertained look. Obviously he thought Regin's interpretation of his words quite funny. The former Death Eater was just about to stick out his tongue at Harry. Very mature, but then he had recently gotten back into contact with his brother, so he might be excused. When Hermione spoke up again, her face hard and not understanding at all. Harry, she said, what by Merlin is wrong with you? That actually removed the amusement straight from Harry's face. Nothing is wrong with me, Hermione, he answered coolly, his eyes suddenly settling on her again. You, this man? You can't tell me that this man isn't forcing you to do whatever you're doing just now. Hermione looked at him with a frown. Harry, you have to go to Dumbledore. I don't have to do anything, Harry interrupted her, suddenly ice in his voice. And I definitely won't go to a damn traitor because you say so. Hermione stared at him. Traitor? She asked, unsure. Almighty Albus Dumbledore, Harry huffed, now annoyed with her. Dumbledore? Harry? What are you talking about? Dumbledore definitely— Dumbledore, Harry interrupted her with hard eyes, has been planning my death since the day my parents have been murdered. Well, if Harry was truthful, this might not have been totally true, but Harry also knew that after his history with the man who denied the dead in 2 wars their true recognition, not out of spite, but out of blindness, he would never see the man in a good light ever again. So chances were that Harry saw his actions a lot more biased, a lot more dangerous than Albus Dumbledore had wanted them to be for Harry. Nevertheless, Harry couldn't stop from formulating his answer in the way he saw Albus Dumbledore's actions after his experiences with the man. He doubted that Dumbledore actually wanted to kill him, but he sadly also doubted that the man had searched for another way to keep Harry alive in all the time since he had found out about the now-removed Horcrux in Harry's scar. Obviously, his answer hit both of his childhood friends hard, because Ron and Hermione gasped, disbelief wearing with fear in their eyes. You, Harry, you don't mean that. I mean, just because this stranger told you. Hermione tried to counter Harry's words, but Harry decided that he had enough of her views, and this time didn't even let her finish. Rig did not tell me anything like that, he interrupted her coolly. But this summer I was able to go to Diagon Alley alone, Harry elaborated, changing his story a bit because he had no intention to tell his childhood friends about his summer or the millennia in between. I went to Gringotts for some money, just to discover that I am a lord and emancipated since at least my 15th birthday. His cool eyes wandered from the confused of Hermione to the slowly understanding one of Ron. But then, I remember telling you about that part before, Harry continued, waving it off. I don't— Harry interrupted Hermione before she could actually get her wits together enough to object to what he had to say. Nevertheless, that was the beginning, he said, concentrating more on Ron, who hadn't said anything, than on spluttering Hermione. That was the reason why I discovered that Albus Dumbledore saw it fit to neglect my parents' will and placed me with my aunt instead of the persons I should have gone to. I also found out that instead of giving the money my parents had kept aside for raising me to my guardians, he saw it fit to use it for who knows what. So tell me, Hermione, does this traitor have a right to know what I am up to? Harry, Hermione spluttered. Hermione, Ron interrupted her this time. I know you looked up heirs, but not following the wishes of a decreased lord when it comes to his heir, refusing to ensure that the heir is educated in our ways. Ron took a deep breath. The worst is the refusal to tell the heir of his lordship when he turned 15, Harry said quietly. Ron looked away uncomfortable when he heard that. Harry knew that Ron had understood the hidden meaning behind Harry's words far better than Hermione, as Hermione wasn't a pure blood. An heir of a house was emancipated when he turned 15. As of that point he had to fulfill his duty as a lord, and one of the duties was the Wizengamot meetings. A lord had to attend them or send a proxy, The Wizengamot's first meeting always took place in January. A young lord had to have his lordship at least half a year to participate. If he didn't participate in the next January meeting after the half-a-year stipulation was fulfilled, he fortified his right for his seat until he turned 23 years of age. Doing so naturally lowered the political power of the house, and Potter had a high clout of power. If Harry would not attend the next meeting, Potter would suffer an irreparable loss in status. But the Wizengamot, Ron finally whispered with huge eyes, his gaze searching Harry's. Your family is one of the most important ones since I dunno, when you do not attend your house definitely would lose its reputation. Yes, Harry answered grimly while Hermione looked a little lost. Harry sighed and explained to her what Ron had grasped automatically. But why should Dumbledore do? He was named proxy by some twisted play of his after I was given by him to my aunt instead of my rightful guardian. Harry answered coolly. He used my seat for his agenda until now, and he is not pure blood enough to understand the impact of raising me unaware and using my seat. But while Ron's frown deepened, Hermione finally seemed to gear up to defend the former headmaster of Hogwarts. But Dumbledore never was a good politician, Harry ended Hermione's sentence. He is manipulative, but he does not get the full consequences of his doings. He was never interested enough in the customs of pure bloods that he truly understands them, and he has forgotten a lot of things his father might have taught him when he was young because of his favorism towards Muggle-borns. Those words actually ensured that Hermione stopped with her stuttering and instead returned to her normal character. You sound like Malfoy, Harry, Hermione accused him, fuming. No, Harry answered. I don't think that pure bloods are better. I simply said that pure bloods are raised with the customs of the wizarding world. Muggle-borns have to learn them, but because of Dumbledore's neglect, never do. There is a difference between thinking that Muggle-borns are inferior and understanding that our culture is simply different than the Muggle one, and that Muggle-borns who aren't taught the difference will have problems living in the wizarding world. You cannot change a tradition easily that was taught for thousands of years. You have to teach those that aren't raised with this tradition our ways, so that they're able to understand why we act like we do. This time Hermione hesitated. You've also grown up in the Muggle world, she finally pointed out. I have, Harry answered. Rig's teaching me the way of the wizards. Regulus looked at him in amusement at that, clearly just not objecting because Hermione and Ron were in front of them. Hermione now looked at said man. Regulus Black, Reg offered, not even trying to conceal his identity. There wouldn't be anyone Hermione and Ron could warn before it was already too late, considering that Sirius already knew it was basically too late anyway. I'm Sirius' younger brother. I met Harry by chance, and when I found out he knows nothing, I decided to teach him. Hermione blinked when she heard his declaration. Aren't you dead? She asked, leery, remembering Sirius saying something like that in the summer. Reg laughed. I am not, as you can see, he answered, smiling, but then he said seriously, I went into hiding and let myself officially die. So somehow I really am dead. But why? Ron asked, astonished. Reg sighed. I was a Death Eater once, he said, and suddenly the other two had pointed their wands at him again. He rolled his eyes. I was one for 4 days until I understood it was nothing like my parents told me it would be. After that I looked for a way to destroy Tom Riddle, and that's what I have been doing for the last 15 years. And because of that we're here tonight, Harry intercepted. I promised to help him, and he needs my help to find an object that has to be destroyed, as it is the cause that Riddle did not die all those years ago. But Harry, he's a Death Eater. Ron objected, for once actually speaking up with distrust clearly shown on his face. Harry sighed. For a second he closed his eyes, but then he looked up to first look at Hermione and then at Ron. I know who he once was, he told them both. But I also know who he is now. I don't want a discussion with you two tonight. We have enough to do without. But what if what he said you have to do will actually help Volin? It won't. Regulus interrupted her immediately, looking quite unhappy after that declaration. Or do you want to accuse Augusta Longbottom of working with the Dark Lord as well? Hermione's eyes glittered with defiance. Why shouldn't she? Ron actually reached out to hold her mouth shut. What? Ron? Hermione freed her mouth from his hands. Hermione, don't accuse the Dowager Longbottom, Ron hissed, eyeing Regulus and Harry warily. Her son, Neville's father, and her daughter-in-law, Neville's mother, were attacked by you-know-whose people at the end of the last war. Accusing her to actually work with those people, this could get you in a lot of trouble. Especially because the Blacks, the Potters, and also the Weasleys are actually allied with the Longbottoms politically. Harry pointed out, his left eyebrow raised. But some things you don't do in the wizarding world, Hermione, Ron whispered to her. And one of them is to accuse a whole political alliance to work with people who killed parts of their family. Or do you want to accuse me and Harry of willingly working with you-know-who as well? Hermione said nothing for a moment, but then she slowly shook her head. No, she said, hesitatingly. No, but, Harry interrupted her, his eyes hard. Now, Ron, if you would. For a moment, Ron hesitated, but then he looked a bit pleadingly at Harry. May we help? And when Harry frowned, he hurriedly added, I mean, you said yourself you would need months to search this room, so why don't you let us help? For a moment, Harry clearly wanted to say no, but then Regulus touched his arm and he sighed. All right, he gave in. You can help, but I want you to clearly listen to Regulus's and my instructions. If you don't think you can listen to our command, you won't help. Hermione frowned, but Ron nodded. I will listen, Ron agreed. But Ron, Hermione protested, it's Harry. Why should we listen to Harry when he's our age? Well, but he obviously knows not only what they're looking for, but also how to handle it. Mine, Ron pointed out, looking at Hermione as if she would dare to slap him for saying that. Hermione frowned, but Regulus nodded. Considering that neither Hermione nor Ron would be able to warn anybody of the Order in time before Harry would have already destroyed the Horcrux, Harry and Regulus both weren't too bothered by the idea of Harry's childhood friends knowing that Harry and Regulus had been after something. At least, they weren't worried as long as Ron and Hermione wouldn't stumble upon the word Horcrux. So, Ron said slowly when Harry and Reg stepped aside to allow Ron and Hermione, even if Hermione still looked like she wasn't too happy with calling Harry for help when she actually found what they would be looking for. But as long as she was calling either Reg or Harry, Harry didn't actually care. What are we actually looking for? Ron asked, looking around with a frown in the full room. A diadem, Harry sighed and gestured. In front of him, a replica of the diadem made out of magic started to flow in the air. It looks like this. Ron looked at the diadem. Ha, he said. So this is it? It is, Harry agreed, having seen it on Halloween when his mind had been connected to Tom Riddle. Hermione, meanwhile, stared at the floating diadem made out of magic with huge eyes. How did you do that? She stuttered, staring at the magic. I don't even know. How can you do magic like that? I have never seen someone do a spell like this. Regulus looked at the spell Harry had done and waved it off. He's been doing that one as long as I actually know him, Regulus said disinterestedly. Now, let's go and actually look for that thing. Hopefully we will be able to find that thing tonight. And if we don't? Ron asked with a frown. Harry sighed. Then there's only tomorrow, he replied. After that, the Christmas holidays start. And with it, hopefully, the next part of his plan. But that wasn't something he would tell either Ron or Hermione. In the end, they didn't even have to search until twilight. It was Ron who found the diadem, and it was Regulus who bagged it. With a last look towards Regulus, Harry left the room of requirement with his two childhood friends, but the look they shared said it all. Tomorrow night, after Harry had definitely ensured that there would be no one following him this time around, they would destroy that Horcrux as well. As for Ron and Hermione, well, Harry didn't feel too guilty when he applied a rune to their skin with a friendly touch that would ensure that both of his childhood friends simply wouldn't actively remember about the whole diadem hunt as long as they weren't reminded of it. It might not be perfect, but it was the best he could do, and it wasn't as Harry would need them to stay quiet after the beginning of January. Alastor Moody was sitting silently in the back of the meeting of the Order of the Phoenix. He was listening to Albus Dumbledore speak, at least with half an ear. The rest of his attention was centered elsewhere entirely. Potter, and everything Potter had said. He was sure The boy was actually hiding a lot of other things still, and yet he knew that whatever the boy was hiding, it wasn't something easily found out. The boy, he knew too much. It had taken a while for Moody to actually understand that fact, but the moment he had, something had changed within him. Alastor knew that the boy had changed throughout the summer. Alastor also knew that the boy wasn't an imposter, and yet he had changed, and it was more than just finding out his name that summer. Alastor might have believed that in the beginning, but then his father had come up, and his father's death, and while the explanation of why Potter had changed had sounded believable at first, the way he talked and the way he had interacted with Alastor had made it a lie over time. Yet even now Alastor couldn't actually tell why his gut told him the boy was lying. He knew that the boy had said the truth in a way, yet the words uttered by the boy sounded like a lie in Moody's memories. And wasn't that an odd and totally confusing revelation? It was that thought process that actually drew Mad-Eye Moody into his mind while sitting on his chair in the corner of Grimmauld Place's kitchen while listening to the headmaster's talk. Of course, Alastor Mad-Eye Moody knew that he should actually listen to the man he called his leader in the fight against Voldemort right now, but instead of doing what he should, his mind went over everything the Potter boy had told him whenever he spoke to the child. A 15-year-old boy, confirmed by Veritas Serum. A runic ward created within seconds, in a way no other adult wizard Moody had met ever had been able to. So how had a 15-year-old managed what an adult couldn't? Admitted secrets in the hands of a child who was unbelievably wise for his admitted years. Moody's own voice declaring, "You know a lot about that time, don't you, Potter? And it doesn't seem to be things that you should actually be able to know." Yet for all Potter shouldn't have been able to know, he still knew. He still knew far too much, was far too knowledgeable about things that should have been lost in time and forgotten. And he won't be remembered for his deed except by us. Us, as in Alastor and Potter? But why Potter? Why was Potter one of those who remembered? Because Potter shouldn't be able to remember. Potter hadn't been born at that time, hadn't lived at that time, shouldn't even know about Alaric Moody and his death. And who should have told the boy so that he did? Albus Dumbledore didn't know. Garrick Ollivander didn't know. And Charles Potter had died before he could tell his grandson. So who? There was nobody who should have been able to, nobody who should have even thought about telling Potter something so unimportant as the circumstances of a mere man out of million. All these thoughts were just supported by Potter's own words about the death of Alastor's father, spurning Alastor's own conclusion in a way he had never thought to think of before. Yet as unimportant as my father has been for history, you still know about him, you still know how he died. And behind all that thoughts about the death of Alaric Moody, a missing name from a list Alastor Moody had created: Mad Marius, Charles Potter, Arcturus Black, Newt Scamander, Garrick Ollivander and Sal Sanctuary. Nearly all of them are dead. Garrick wouldn't know. The same for Scamander. And Sanctuary? What happened to Sanctuary? Mad Marius was dead, Arcturus Black and Charles Potter were dead, but Sanctuary? There was no evidence. Nothing about the man that told Moody he was still alive or already dead. Alive, Moody's gut told him, created from the silence when he told Potter that the rest of the people who knew about Alaric Moody's death were dead. Potter knew how Alaric died. Potter had kept his silence when Alastor had assumed that those who knew were all dead. Potter said, "Alaric, when speaking about Alastor's father, why do you feel the need to honor those who fought and died in the war against Grindelwald?" And eyes so old, so unbelievable old, had looked back at him, pierced him with their tired gaze. That's the question, isn't it, Lord Moody? Harry James Salvatio Amethyst Potter. And yet I have still no idea how you knew about Sal Sanctuary. Sanctuary, do you all have to add that name to Sala? Sal Sanctuary. Harry James Salvatio Amethyst Potter. No true first name for a hero known throughout Europe. Sal. No last name for a hero fighting against Grindelwald. Sanctuary. Just a nickname for a first name for a hero known throughout Europe. Sal. Just a nickname for a last name for a hero fighting against Grindelwald. Sanctuary. And a sudden understanding in an old Aurora's mind. You found out your true name this summer. Is that the reason why you are different from what Albus described? Partly. It was absurd, it was impossible, and yet it was the only thing that could be true in any way or form. It was the only thing that combined all the evidence that explained how Potter could have changed so much, matured so much, embittered so much. The boy, no, the man. Potter had been forged long before that day the boy had been attacked by the Dementors. There was no imposter, there was just the man, the boy everybody else had known had become. Harry James Salvatio Amethyst Potter. Harry James Salvatio Amethyst Sanctuary. Salvatio Sanctuary. Sal Sanctuary. Alastor Moody's eyes opened. It was then that he noticed he had closed them at some point while he had retreated to his mind. I want you to take a look who actually voted for my removal from Hogwarts. Albus Dumbledore continued, frowning at Alastor. Obviously he had noticed that Moody hadn't actually listened to a word he said. We must know who else has been brought over to Tom's side before the next meeting of the Wizengamot in a few weeks. I'm concerned about some people. Augusta Longbottom has been seen talking to Narcissa Malfoy, and I fear for her and her grandson. But the only thing Alastor could hear in his ears were his own words, proclaiming his father having given up his own life for the heir of Black. His eyes travelled over the rest of the order, stopping when they met the grey ones of a man who looked so much like his grandfather that one time Moody had seen the man as a child that it hurt. Of course, Albus, Moody said before standing up. If you excuse me now, I have a lead to follow. There were some odd glances all around the table, but Alastor Moody didn't care. Uleric Moody, Newt Scamander, Arcturus Black, Charles Potter, Sal Sanctuary, and Garrick Ollivander. There has happened too much to give a simple answer. It is you who will have to find that answer yourself. Harry James Salvatio Amethyst Potter had never lied to Alastor Moody, but he had also never told him the whole truth. There had always been a secret to his answers that Alastor hadn't been able to determine until he had all the pieces, until he had truly been willing to look. But now, after Alastor had taken a look, he finally knew what he wanted to do, what he had to do, and so he left Grimmauld Place with a last look at Black and apparated straight to Diagon Alley. Sal Sanctuary. Salvatio Sanctuary. The boy that wasn't a boy anymore, and the man that had fought a war yet had never had a true name. A boy with a secret that he wanted to keep in every way possible, yet a man who was willing to tell Moody enough to ensure a child knew about the heroic deeds of his father. Secrets, Potter? Oh yes, and what secrets to have, even for a grown man. Harry James Salvatio Amethyst Potter and Sal Sanctuary. They were one and the same. Time travel. Secrets, Potter? More so than Alastor Moody had ever suspected, secrets wrapped in determination, desperation, and the bitterness of knowing that Albus Dumbledore had only acted for his own gain before. Potter didn't trust the headmaster anymore, and Alastor couldn't fault him, not after finally understanding what had changed the adoration the boy had held for the man into that wariness that the boy now displayed. The death of hundreds or thousands could change a man, and being left alone by a man he had been told was a great hero, and the savior of the world he had been suddenly a part of, something like that would break a man. Time travel. What a destructive way to mature a soul beyond the years it should have lived. It had been that last thought that had decided it for Mad-Eye Moody. He had known the moment he came to that conclusion that he would never be able to return Potter to Albus Dumbledore's side. The only thing Alastor still had under control was his own choice. But then, hadn't he already chosen the moment he decided to actually listen to Potter? There was only one thing Alastor Moody would and could do now that everything had come crashing down around him. And Alastor knew exactly whom to search out when it came to finding information about the third, or was it fourth, considering the Ministry, fraction of the war. And it wasn't Harry James Salvation Amethyst Potter who was still in school and under tight scrutiny from the Ministry, and Albus Dumbledore himself. Mr. Alastor Moody, what can old Ollivander do for you today? The change came slowly. It started as a shiver and the feeling of hidden eyes on her. The hair on her arms and neck stood up, leaving a feeling of exposure in their wake. But unlike with the feeling of being watched, The goosebumps continued to travel all over her body. She shivered again. "Bella?" There was a frown on her husband's face, and he wasn't the only one suddenly looking at her. The Dark Lord and every other Death Eater in the room stared at her as if she had grown another head. The only gaze that was different was the one of the infernal vampire who was leaning in the dark next to the fireplace. His dark eyes were on her, and his gaze was knowing and somehow smug. And maybe Bellatrix Lestrange would have pointed out his different behavior towards the others in the room if the air around her wouldn't have thickened suddenly. Her eyes widened. A feeling of utter coldness traveled up her body, starting from her toes and slowly but surely making her freeze everywhere. Bellatrix had never felt something like that, but she knew what that was anyway. She had heard her father describing it to her as a small child, to warn her from disobeying Arcturus Black. But Arcturus Black was gone, and the only one who could, but never would, was. Without a word, Bellatrix turned on her heels, before running out of the room, not bothering to keep her dignity. She couldn't believe this was happening. She would have never thought that he would. But he had. He had done two things Bellatrix had never expected him to do, and there she was. "I'm a black," she whispered to herself. "I'm a black, I'm a black, I'm a black," but it didn't help. Her legs trembled. Her fingers couldn't keep still enough to even try and draw her wand. She shuddered and stumbled, but forced herself to continue running down the hallway. "I'm a black, I'm a black, I'm a black." Black magic began to dance around her shuddering frame. "No, I'm a black." Black flames left her body as if she was trying to produce fiend fire through her body alone. "No, no, no, I'm a black." Then her legs gave out and she stumbled and crashed to the floor. She tried to stand up again, tried to run and hide, but it was no use. Her legs refused their service, leaving her a trembling mess on the floor of the manor, her lord used as his current hideout. "I'm a black," she mumbled. "Bella." Then her husband was next to her, his face showing his confusion. In the air surrounding her were dark black flames, dancing away from her body in a merry dance. "I'm a black," she repeated desperately. "Of course you are, wife," her husband assured her, but his eyes were on her and not on the dancing flames surrounding her. "Did anything happen?" Bellatrix knew that he was only concerned because being concerned was his duty as her husband. He didn't truly feel anything for her, and he had no idea, absolute no idea at all. "No," she gasped, trying and failing to get to her feet. "No, no." "Is it the spell?" her husband asked. "The one you were hit with in Azkaban? The one the healer hit you with?" But her husband wouldn't dare to formulate his words like that after she cursed anybody who did into oblivion before. "No," she forced out. But maybe was that the reason? Was that the reason why she was feeling so cold, so lonely? Was that the reason why? It would explain so much, and it would explain it a lot better than him being the aggressor. He wouldn't do it after all, not if it meant to acknowledge what he had never wanted to be true in the first place. Bella, but she didn't listen to the false concern of her husband. Instead, her mind turned inwards to something she had tried to forget since the day it happened. That one thing that seemed to have turned her life into a living hell even before this awful and yet fateful day. Ever since that fateful day in Azkaban, everything she touched seemed to vanish in front of her eyes from her grasp for forever, just like the ghost she had attacked in Azkaban. She shuddered at that thought. Bella! That one time had been one of the worst in her entire life, including her stay in Azkaban. That green light, nearly the same shade of the killing curse. That unbelievable power coursing through her body, nearly destroying her. If it hadn't been for some other Death Eater's skills in healing, Bellatrix wouldn't have survived. Whatever that curse had been, and it definitely hadn't been the killing curse, no matter the similar color and the fact that she had been in a dead-like state for the next 3 weeks, it had been vicious and destructive for her body. "It's like a healer's curse," one of the Death Eaters treating her had said. "Everybody knows that healers are the most dangerous if they curse you. There's a reason why we have the oaths, after all." Bella? A healer's curse? There had been a lot of skeptic looks sent the Death Eater's way when he said that. The man, on the other hand, just frowned at them. "I mean it," he exclaimed, his frown not lessening. Healers don't curse anybody, one of the others pointed out, but the Death Eater had been insistent. They do, he said. Some do. Then his eyes darkened. I've only seen it once, he told them. That man, he killed 7 of us and took the Dark Lord out of commission for a whole 4 months. And all of that because the Dark Lord decided to attack one of his patients. Bella. There was scoffing all around, but Bellatrix, she said nothing. She remembered an incident like that as well. She remembered her Aunt Walburga talking about it, and was that man right? Was it a healer's curse that had affected her? That thought had scared her, because she remembered her aunt telling her that when the Dark Lord had been hit with the curse, he had lost every and any ability to heal from potions or spells done by sworn healers or potions masters. It had taken the darkest of magic to break that curse. Bella, but for her, nobody had tried to break the curse, and while she was still living, still breathing, she was also still entrapped in that nightmare the curse had invoked. No potions to aid her, no spells to actually heal her, and the absolute inability to see her for those who had taken their final oaths as a healer or potions master. Bella, even Snape hadn't been able to help her, mostly because he didn't even hear her anymore or see her at all. It was as if the curse ensured that she wasn't there for him to see at all, and those less strong who still saw her weren't trained enough to break the curse on her. And the Dark Lord, Bella? She was forced out of her spinning thoughts when her husband actually hit her. She cursed him for it, making him writhe on the floor in front of her. But her spells were less strong than normal, suddenly missing the most of the fierce and deadly magic she had relied on for all her life. Instead, said magic just started dancing black flames, even faster around her in the air, and with every second she held the curse, the magic left her body at twice the speed it had before when she hadn't used magic at all. She stopped the curse and instead reached out to the flames dancing in the air in front of her. I'm a black, she whispered to the flames. I'm a black. But the flames danced out of her reach, not believing her claim. Her voice shuddered and broke. I'm a black. She had never pleaded in all her life. But those last few seconds before the last of the black flames left her body left her with the feeling that she should plead. That she should plead with magic for all it was worth. But before she could actually act on that thought, it was already too late. The last flame left her cold and shivering body, taking the last of its heat with her. She shuddered again. Her body, already stressed under the curse of the healer, the curse so much like the killing curse, and yet so much more cruel and different, folded when that last little flame ripped itself from her core. She choked on the name, unable to utter it anymore, and she knew for a fact that if not all of what made her a black, most of it at least was gone, disowned, forever lost to her in any way or form. There were things like her hair and eyes and facial structure that would forever stay black. There might even be a touch of her magic still remaining, but everything else, everything that actually bound her to the family that had once made her Bellatrix black, was gone. Lost with the dancing black flames in front of her. One last time she reached for them from her crumpled position on the floor. I'm a black, she croaked, but the flames just danced one last time around her body before dissolving into nothingness. No, you're not, their actions seemed to say, and the second time in barely 2 months, Bellatrix closed her eyes, her crumpled body lying on the floor like dead. Like dead, because, as cruel as the healer had been, as cruel as her cousin had been, neither of them had the heart to end Bellatrix Lestrange's former black's pitiful life. That was unusually cruel, Regulus remarked, leaning backwards against the wall, not sounding surprised at all by his older brother's deed. Sirius just shrugged. It had to be done, he said. Regulus just raised an eyebrow. A simple disownment would have been enough as well, he pointed out. Most people don't bother to recall a family magic she can't give to her descendants anyway. Sirius shrugged. I thought it a more thorough way of doing things, he countered. Leaving her with just a sliver of black magic after all she had done seemed just wrong, you know? Regulus raised an eyebrow at that, but stepped away from the wall to help his brother heal his cut wrist, which he had used to conduct the ritual. Did you actually learn those protections? Grandfather insisted on before we started on our first rituals, or do I have to start wondering if you're going insane next? He asked his older brother with a frown. Sirius waved it off. I learned them and did them when I was 15. Mother wasn't happy with me. She thought them unnecessary, he answered. Regulus snorted. Well, he drawled, that at least explains Mother. Sirius snorted. You think? He asked, and when his brother reached out for his wrist, Sirius let Regulus treat him without a second thought. I'm surprised it went as well as it did, Sirius said. I actually haven't done that stuff ever before, you know. Regulus raised an eyebrow at his older brother. Like you never did our warding? Sirius just shrugged. Our warding and ward breaking is as dark as any other ritual we have in this family, he pointed out. I have never wanted anything to do with the bigoted way of our mother and father. He never said anything different. So are you truly surprised that I never used a spell of what I was taught? Regulus sighed. No, he confessed. I'm just surprised that you actually did the protections our family has in place since the founder's time. When Sirius raised an eyebrow at Regulus, the man shrugged. Considering that believing family legend they have been taught by Salazar Slytherin himself, I thought you wouldn't touch them even with a stick. Sirius frowned, but then he shrugged. Mother didn't want me to learn them, he explained. I figured learning them would piss her off, so the decision wasn't hard to make, taught by Slytherin or not. Regulus snorted, amused. Should have figured that argument would bring you to learn anything, even something considered dark magic, he said, amused. Sirius just raised an eyebrow at his brother. Not just considered, he corrected. Rituals like those are dark magic, that every healer apprentice has to learn. Regulus pointed out drolly. Very dark magic indeed, big brother. Sirius opened his mouth to object, just to close it again without uttering a word. There was no way he could actually argue against that, because he knew that his little brother had actually been telling the truth. Sirius had been interested in a career as a healer before leaving Hogwarts, and he had researched the whole thing and found out about the rituals used to keep healers safe. Rituals that were, but some minor differences, the same the Black family had used for far longer than the healers ever had to protect their family members from the magic they regularly dabbled in. Well, most family members. Sirius somehow doubted that Bellatrix and his mother had ever gone through the rituals like they should have. Ouch, he exclaimed, his attention drawn to his brother who had been treating his hand. Regulus rolled his eyes at him. If you had paid attention to me at all, you would have known that the next spell I use would hurt a bit, he pointed out dryly before cleaning Sirius's healed hand with a flick of his wand. Sirius frowned at his brother. Who the hell raised you to be the bastard you are? He grumbled good-naturedly. Regulus just raised an eyebrow in return, his eyes pointedly looking at Sirius himself. Sirius got the message. He huffed. You can't actually blame me for your prickly personality, can you? He grumbled. Regulus just continued to look at him. I wasn't that bad, Reggie. Sirius defended himself. I was a prankster, and a bit wild, but that doesn't mean... His brother's gaze didn't waver. Sirius groaned. All right, he agreed, giving in. It's all my fault. I should have been a proper big brother and not just gotten you into trouble and left you there all the damn time. Good to know we agree on something, Regulus said, suddenly cheerful, and with a pat on Sirius' head moved to leave the room. His brother's eyes widened. Hey, he exclaimed, you guilt-tripped me deliberately, you little... Then he broke off, blinking in surprise. That stunned silence was used by his brother to actually leave the cellar. You prankster, Sirius finally brought out, still far too stunned about the actions of his little brother. You damn little prankster, you. You tricked me. And with an amazed and somewhat proud shake of his head, he followed his brother upstairs. I knew that someday I would manage to be a good influence on you, he called cheerfully. That's one way to put it. A voice that was known to Sirius yet wasn't Regulus answered, amused. But do you truly want to take claim on the fact that Reg managed to prank the whole world into thinking him dead when he was around a much more capable teacher all the time, my dear Pad Daddy? Sirius stopped short on the last step down to the cellar. Hey, that's Dogfather to you, Sirius protested, but his protest was automatic, and it was only when he had uttered it that he understood what he had said at all. It had been the same he had always said when he had been called Pad Daddy by the voice in the kitchen. A voice he knew, a voice he had heard before, years and years ago. Salvazahar, he said, his tongue not even stumbling over a name the most of the current world couldn't pronounce at all. Dogfather, the other man returned the greeting, and Sirius's whole world turned on its axis once again.